All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Board of Behavioral Sciences Supervision Committee. Today is April 10th, 2015. It's 9:33 a.m. I want to let you know, it looks like you have to push this button. No, it doesn't need pushed. Okay. All right. To please make sure and use the microphone and come up to the front if you have any questions or comments. We're at the Ayers Hotel and Suites in Costa Mesa at 325 Bristol Street. I think that's it, right? So let's do introductions. I'm Dr. Leah Brew. I'm the chair of the committee and the LPCC representative. We'll start, which way? We'll start with Steve.
Sorry. Should have been listening to what you said. Excuse me? Oh, there we go. Steve Sodergren, Assistant Executive Officer of the Board of Behavioral Sciences.
I'm Sarita Kohli, and I'm the LMFT member.
Kim Madsen, the Executive Officer for the Board of Behavioral Sciences.
Betty Connolly, LEP member. Christy Berger, Board of Behavioral Sciences staff.
Roseanne Helms, Board of Behavioral Sciences staff.
And you don't have to come up, but if you would be willing to introduce yourself in the audience, that would be really nice. So, Dean, do you want to start?
Dean Porter, California Association for LPCCs. Hi, Kathy Atkins, California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
I'm Steve Sultanoff. I'm professor at Pepperdine University and a trainer, continuing education trainer.
Hi, I'm Wendy Village. I'm a marriage family therapist intern. Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Rivas, MFT intern. Sylvia Garcia, MFT intern. Barbara Philippone, AMFT supervisor.
Charlene Gonzalez, LCSW, DCFS, LA County.
Jeremy Wong, NASW.
Welcome.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. I'm glad you're here. So we'll start with the update on prior committee decisions. Who's going to do that? Christy?
That would be me. Is my microphone on? Yes. Okay. I'm not going to go over a lot of this because I think we've all heard this before. So we have a formal decision on supervised experience hours, which is has been approved by the board, and we do have an author for the bill, so it's been introduced in the legislature, and it's SB 620, which is here in the meeting materials. It's being authored by Senator Marty Block and has been, and so the language in the bill originally allowed for a 2-year transition period, but to make sure that no one is negatively affected by the change in the experience hours, it's going to be a 5-year transition. So you can qualify under the old regime or the new regime during that period of time. There's also some informal decisions that we will go over later in the meeting materials, so I won't go over those right now. It'll be mentioned when we talk about supervisor qualifications. I did want to mention a couple of other ones that we'll address at future meetings. So one thing that we sort of informally discussed is that we could allow triadic supervision in place of individual supervision, that off-site supervision laws should be consistent across the different license types, and that the off-site supervision laws should encompass off-site supervisors who are employed or contracted by the employer as opposed to only addressing off-site supervisors who are in a volunteer capacity. So we want to try to make that more consistent and more make a little more sense in today's world. So, and there are several remaining areas that we're going to be addressing in the future in the Supervision Committee, which will be the requirements for supervision, so things like the amount and type of weekly supervision, supervision formats, the monitoring and evaluation of the supervisee. And then we'll also be talking about supervisor responsibilities in the future and employment and employers. And that'll encompass a number of things. So that's kind of where we're at this point.
So, Christy, what do we do next with regard to these other decisions that we made? So we're keeping the 2 out of 5 years. Was there one before that?
Yeah, those few are going to be, when we get to the last agenda item, they're incorporated into the discussion regarding supervisor qualifications. So I have it listed under prior committee decisions, so we'll go.
And then what about the triadic supervision piece?
So that will be, I believe that we're hoping to get to actual supervision requirements at the next meeting.
Okay.
So we'll be looking at that in that context.
Okay. Okay, good.
Okay,
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Anything from the board on that? Any questions? How about in the audience? No? All right. And, whoops, trying to flip through the bill here. Oh, yes, that's, yeah. So, just so everyone knows, we have our meeting materials electronically to save the state some money and printing paper and mailing the paper. So we're not doing email, just in case anyone's wondering. All right.
And then just, is this on?
You have to be a little bit closer,
It is
I
on
think.
my computer, but everybody.
Can you hear? Generally, I speak fairly loud anyway. So I just want to let everyone know that the bill that Christy referred to, Senate Bill 620, that it will be heard in the Senate Business and Professions Committee on Monday. So we'll be there.
All right. Thank you. All right, let's move on to discussion and possible action regarding telehealth supervised work experience.
That would be me. So we had a topic that we wanted to bring up regarding our bill that Christy mentioned earlier, SB 620, regarding streamlining the hours of supervised experience. Some stakeholders, as well as Senate Business and Professions Committee at one point, has raised concern that SB 620 removes the limit on experience hours gained via telehealth. And so some people have expressed concern that this could potentially allow an applicant to gain all of his or her experience hours via telehealth. Current law, the way it is now, limits LMFT and LPCC applicants to no more than 375 hours providing personal psychotherapy, crisis counseling, other counseling services. There is not currently a telehealth experience limit for LCSW applicants. And so in order to kind of gauge how much experience people are currently gaining via telehealth, we talked to our board evaluators who indicated they didn't typically see a lot of telehealth experience hours. And then we pulled a sample just randomly of 100 LMFT recent applications for exam eligibility to see how many hours they were gaining via telehealth on average. The results of the survey can be found in the packet. You can see that it's split between pre-degree telehealth hours that they were gaining as a trainee and post-degree telehealth hours that they were gaining as an intern, and then total. We found that very few applicants are even anywhere close to maxing out the 375 allowed telehealth hours right now. Only 6 of the 100 applicants we surveyed had over 300 hours at all. The average hours gained per person was 66, and the median was 21, which is really skewed because a lot of people were at 0. But since the concern had been raised and because the bill is moving through committee, and at some point we may be asked to put a cap on the hours if that concern becomes great enough, we wanted to kind of bring it up in committee so that we had some idea, if a cap is required, what we would want that cap to be. So basically, I kind of want to open it up for discussion, and I kind of envision three possible outcomes for today. The committee can decide that they want to leave telehealth as is, no matter what, and meaning that there would be no limit on telehealth hours, and that would stay. The committee could decide to leave it as is, but determine a preferred limit on telehealth if we are required to put in a limit on telehealth. Or we can just, at this time, decide to amend the bill to add a limit on telehealth hours. And then if we want to do that, I can make some suggestions on where that might go in the bill text.
So comments from the board? Yeah, Betty?
I did have, I had a couple of comments that came to mind when I was reading that. I was wondering, and I don't think we will ever know this is just kind of because there is currently a limit, could that have some influence over the fact that that the amount of telehealth that's being done is so low, because people are knowing that there's a limit and probably are perhaps more cautious than they normally would be. And then the other thing that occurs to me is that we're really in an emerging age when it comes to providing telehealth, and really just starting to talk about all of the requirements and the parameters, and I'm just wondering if we're at the kind of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to that. So my feeling would be I would feel more comfortable if we had something in there that that put some kind of limit on telehealth.
Sarita?
Yeah, so would telehealth include Skype and that kind of stuff as well?
Well, they would have to be HIPAA compliant, so they can't do Skype, because the moment you use some sort of electronic means, you become a HIPAA provider. So not Skype, but those types of resources, yes, that maintain the
So
confidentiality.
I guess what do we mean by telehealth? Is only telephone?
No.
It would
It
be.
could telehealth could be over the telephone. It could.
And it could. There are softwares that are available to provide a Skype-like environment, but it's just better protected than Skype. So yeah, you could do video
Yeah.
conferencing, or you could do telephone conferencing.
Just audio.
Audio, yes, but it's still, again, once you use the electronic means for anything,
Yeah.
which means even sending an email with your data to the insurance company, then you become a HIPAA provider, and those are pretty strict rules.
Yeah, and I think in the business of doing what we do, I think it was important anyway, whatever method we use. But
Yeah.
I would feel very uncomfortable actually not restricting the number of telehealth hours.
Okay.
I think
How about from our stakeholders? Where are you all? Jen Lee? You're getting stuck coming up by yourself. Oh no, here's Dean also. No, come up, Jan. There's two seats. Come on up. Her thunder.
Dean Porter, California Association for LPCCs. Do we have a feel from the Business and Professions Committee, which will need to pass our bill in order for it to move along, whether they will pass it if we don't limit?
We don't have a feel right now. It was mentioned early on when we had found an author. As a concern, it has not come up again at this time, but it is just starting to move through committee. So
Right.
it's a very busy time at the legislature right now. So I'm imagining if it's going to come up, it will come more into focus when it comes into committee.
Yeah. So your idea of being prepared with the number of hours in case we need to do it is probably a good idea.
Right. I at least want to have a feel from the committee what we would like, rather than having to settle for something on the spot.
Because if the B&P committee doesn't like it, we're not going to go anywhere. So that's pretty important. The second question I have, do we have any idea of the types of counseling that is being done via telehealth? For instance, I got a question yesterday from an intern who wanted to know if she could get telehealth hours for staffing a crisis hotline, a suicide hotline. And so it wouldn't be, a client going through a series of sessions of psychotherapy. And so it just made me wonder, do we have any idea? And I don't know that we define it down. I don't know.
I think crisis counseling is one of the.
Yeah, it's is there. So
Yeah.
does a suicide hotline count? And could someone get hours just manning this
Are they
phone?
doing counseling, or are they referring? Are they
Yeah.
assessing and referring?
That
This
might
would be
be
the-
part of what we need to
Well, I think
suggest.
that's one of the scary things that gets regulated by language of like psychotherapy in nature, and that
Yeah.
they're going to do what they do, and unless somebody gets in trouble, then no one's going to get caught.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to enforce that.
Yeah, I
Which
just
might
can't
be
see
a-
somebody getting all their hours by manning a
Right. So, which
phone
is a good
line.
reason to put a limit for telehealth.
Maybe, yeah.
And if you look at the definition under 2290.5, what telehealth is, it means the mode of delivering healthcare services and public health information via information and communication technologies to facilitate the diagnosis, consultation, treatment, education, care management, and self-management of a patient's health care while the patient is at the originating site and the healthcare provider is at a distant site. Telehealth facilitates patient self-management and caregiver support for patients and includes,
So suicide is,
Yeah.
counts.
Yeah.
A suicide
Yeah.
hotline counts.
Yeah. So, yeah,
Okay.
under that
definition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before moving on, Sarita, you had something?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a sense of, from the staff here, how do we know, like, how many people, how many therapists there are, or how many clients they see in sort of rural areas or areas where there aren't as many providers available?
It's definitely something that is being used in rural areas because there's a shortage of practitioners. So it's important for people in those areas.
Yes.
So you kind of have to balance that, thinking about the
Yeah,
lack
as
of resources.
Yeah, so as I vociferously said, I feel strongly about it. I had a quick rethink and thought, okay, there's people out there. I live in an urban area, but there are people out there that live in other places for whom telehealth might become necessary almost.
It is being used quite a lot.
Yeah,
in those
but even
areas.
then, I mean, after 3,000 hours, I think we should have some limits on that.
Okay. Jenley?
Janley Wong, NASW. I have the same question that Sarita has, and I think it's important not to jump before determining not only the rural-urban factors, but other factors that might influence the number of hours in telehealth. That includes availability of hospitals, outpatient clinics, and other venues for people to get their service. I'm also really concerned that if you set some kind of limit and somebody needs more hours than the limit, does that mean that a client would have to drive 25 hours, or a therapist would have to drive 25 miles, 50 miles, 75 miles, because you put some kind of limit on what service they can get?
Well, there are lots of hours that people do that don't count because they've exceeded the bucket. So this would just be, in good faith, no, they need to continue seeing that client, but it just won't continue to count, is the way I would perceive it.
It just seems unfair then.
But so you would be comfortable with 1,250 client contact hours all being telehealth?
I don't see why that would be a problem. Also, when you're talking about suicide, actually beyond just information and referral, suicide is a very clinical, difficult area, and it should be hopefully staffed by people through a referral on the hotline that are professional and clinical. Because if somebody goes through with it because they didn't, get the right counseling on the phone, even if it's only for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, then we all would be sorry. So I don't like the idea that somehow hotline work is less than or not important or not clinical. It's very important.
It is.
Yeah.
Sadly, most of the time they're staffed by undergraduate level people.
Understand.
Yeah,
That's why if people are given some hours for hotline work,
that might
we
help.
might see a more advanced level of clinician for that. So, the other thing is, right now, these statistics really say there's no problem. So I'm just trying to figure out what was the concern. Was it a layperson's concern from committee staff that somehow they don't understand telehealth, or
It was probably me. I blew up
Oh,
in the board.
you.
It was me blowing up in the board meeting, going, "What? What?"
okay.
Not only you, I think we ought, the
all of us
staff, committee staff. Well, and I think it's a change. We've always had minimums and maximums because we thought that this was the best way to protect consumers and make sure that our interns got a well-rounded experience. And we're moving away from that, and I think it's causing a little angst.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but I think Jan Lee raises some good points.
The other thing is we tend to think of clients all the same forever, but younger clients or clients who are more facile with technology or whatever, clients are all different. They're not all the same. So there could be some clients this really works for, and we shouldn't proceed ahead with policy without at least having some information, data, research on clients. You know, what are clients like? You know, are they receiving services this way? Do they like it? Are they satisfied? Are they improving? You know, we don't have that information. We're just thinking that clients are all alike, and they somehow, the better method for them is in person. And that may not be true. If we don't have the data, we don't know that. We don't have the research. So, sorry I'm taking so long, Kathy. Yeah. And then, before setting policy, since the study was only on MFTs and LPCCs, then I'm not sure social workers should be included unless some more research has been done.
Thank you. Kathy?
Kathy Atkins with CAMPT. So our board of directors picked up on this lack of a maximum as well, and we had a very spirited conversation about when we were looking at to support the bill about this particular issue. And we actually, I should say, the board didn't come to any kind of specific conclusion on this, but they did choose to support the bill as is, meaning their support was behind the lack of a cap. I guess to Betty's point, my thought is this is an emerging field and have yet to know what it's going to look like, what are the pros, what are the cons, is there a consumer protection issue? I'm not aware of the social workers having a consumer protection to date, given they don't have a lack. Maybe there is one, but I'm not aware of one. So I think that we would probably say we have supported the bill as it was written, how it's been written to date. If the BBS does feel that they need to cap it because of pressure from the committee, not this committee, the BMP committee, what I would ask is to potentially look at a higher limit versus what it is now. There are people hitting it, as well as consider that down the road, if a cap is put in place, that the BBS be open to reconsidering potentially removing the cap or having it a higher cap. Again, as this emerges, as we learn more, if we raise the cap a little, as suddenly these statistics are people now getting that new cap. So, again, just I think the board couldn't come to a conclusion, but they did support the bill as written, as it is today, meaning no cap. So we would not necessarily be in support of removing that cap, but if you do, we would ask that you look at a higher cap than what is currently in place. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm hearing the whole spectrum, some concern about needing to have a cap and then if a cap, how low, how high, or not having a cap at all. So I'll chime in on it as well. So I first reacted out of my own bias of what I think therapy is and what therapy should be, and that's not what a lot of people do. Excuse me. And so then in my arguments of taking the no cap side, I thought maybe we regulate it if we start to find a problem, right? That right now we prepare a cap if the Business and Profession Committee would want one and make it something generous, but try to get it through without it. And that if we start seeing problems, then we realize, oh, wait a minute. Because my bias is, and it's really strong, like it's about the relationship. And I work with lots of graduate level students who are all millennials and have real struggles with face-to-face interpersonal contact. And they're coming into a profession of nothing but face-to-face interpersonal contact. So I just so firmly believe in the necessity of being skilled at that. But I also can see that whether I like it or not, the wave is changing, and it definitely accommodates people who are in rural areas or have disabilities and are unable to travel. So I'm feeling torn. Sarita, you had your hand up for a second too.
Yeah. So I'm also feeling a little torn about that because I think the reality is that we're going towards everything becoming technologically just all electronic media, and people are communicating from distances, even across countries for that matter. But I sort of feel that this is the part that this is the training part. This is learning to be a professional. And in this part, it is important that we learn various modalities of how you deal with people and what you do. If we don't have a cap, then there is a possibility that some people may not get maybe all their hours, but a lot of their hours doing this means, and then and then we don't know how. I mean, then they don't have supervision after they're licensed. And so I think this is the time when we want to expose people to everything and give them a more all-around experience. So when I got licensed, the limit used to be 250, and so now it's 375. So we've increased it, and maybe we can take it some more. But I really hesitate to have an. I mean, and then there's the issue of how you get supervision, and if you're getting supervision also on the phone or by some electronic media, then you're never in touch with any human being. Not exactly,
You could be completely agoraphobic and get a license.
Yeah, so I would have some concerns about not having the limit on it. That's all.
Thanks, Rita. Betty?
Yeah, and I just want to support that because I was getting ready to say I think we just need to be cautious not to confuse the issue of the value of telehealth, which I don't think anyone's disputing, and going forward as a professional, if you choose to do your entire practice in that medium, then that's fine. But I think Sarita's point is well taken, that we are really talking about a training component, not the value of the telehealth or the importance of people having access to it.
Okay. Steve?
I agree with both of you wholeheartedly. I think the issue is one of appropriate training. And I want to give you two quick examples. Last century, I know someone who did all of her hours telehealth, got licensed completely, never saw a client in face-to-face, did all the hours as telehealth. Now, that was before the new regulations came in, granted, but that happened. The second thing is, many years ago, the board recognized that not to require MFTs in particular to see children and families seemed really silly. And there were a lot of people, not myself included, but a lot of people who never saw a child, couple, or family and got licensed, and you made a decision. That's not appropriate training, so you added that component in. I think the same issue applies here, that appropriate training is balanced, and to not restrict the telehealth leaves you open to have people gaining all their hours telehealth. Now, is that likely? No. But for the few people who do that, is that appropriate? And in terms of providing services for, like, the rural services, true, it's good for the interns to get that experience, but they're not the main providers for rural services. The licensed people are. So I think that there are services available to people in rural areas. Licensed people can do telehealth. So anyway, those are my thoughts on it.
Thank you very much. Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy Vitteledge, MFT intern. Just speaking from the intern side, I've completed my hours in 2013, but I agree also with Sarita to have the full, well-rounded balance of the face-to-face, I think, is so crucial, as well as on those certain circumstances and situations to have telehealth available. So I guess the point here is to have a cap on the telehealth, but not too small. I mean, to be able to have it flexible enough that there is a well-balanced. I think that's really, really important because we're in the people business, and I really believe that having a face-to-face with your clients and developing that warmth. I mean, there's something about facial expressions versus over a phone or over even a webcam. It's just, there's a different energy that comes across with the client. So, thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Hi, just wanted to throw my 2 cents in. I think we also need to look at the underserved and the underrepresented who have no transportation, who I work with victims of crime. Some of them are disabled and can't get around, so I do a lot of home visits. But if they're too far, we need to have that option open. and especially if they're going through a crisis and I can't get to them or they can't get to me.
Yeah, I think everyone's arguing that yes, we need to allow for telehealth, but our question is, do we put a cap on it?
I would say yes, again, just to have that balance, because you don't want someone to take advantage of that either. But I think it should be raised.
Okay. All right. So then the question would be, I'm hearing a stronger consensus for having a cap, that maybe the cap should be greater than, was it 375 hours? Right now, the client contact that we have is $12.50, right, for the 2 licenses, and then for social work, it's $500 of psychotherapy face-to-face contact. Is that correct?
I think it's 1,200.
$17.50.
For the direct counseling and $12.50 for non-direct. Right.
Okay. So there's a question of, do we say, I'm going to randomly put a number, 50%, and that way it covers based on whatever license, or it's what's kind of bizarre about this is we're just randomly pulling a number out of our hats. So, how do we make a good decision about what number is adequate for what we're really looking at is how many minimum number of hours do we want for face-to-face. That's what we're really looking at for somebody to be considered competent. So if we're talking 1250, what is that? 1750. So
Yeah.
So 18,900. So just under 900.
So 1,000. Make it round. I don't know.
I have to say, I find that high for, again, not arguing against telehealth, but do that as a licensed person. As a trainee, as an intern, maybe 500 hours max. And you have a choice to, not to use them in a certain way. If you're operating in an area where your clients are far away or they don't have transportation or they can't come, then you use telehealth with those clients. Don't use it for everybody else. So, I really feel like the face-to-face is important when you're a trainee and an intern.
So that's about just a little under 30%. It's a nice round number.
And also, it allows any number that we set would allow us to keep data in the future. If people were maxing out on it or way under, we would know it could be revisited in the future. The other point I would like to add, though, is we would need to decide if we're going to do, right now, we're pretty much just amending the LMFT and LPCC law. We would need to make a decision if we want to bring the social workers into the bill. We're currently not touching their hours.
Good question. Social workers, I think Jan Lee said, please don't touch us.
Charlene Gonzalez, Children's Services. If you're going to touch social work, then please research social work. You're not researching anything. So if you're going to pull it in to change it, research what exists first, please.
Right. Yeah. So since we don't have time to make that decision, to do the research ahead of time, are we at consensus that 500 is good for MFTs and LPCs, and right now we won't touch social work? And I know you're trying to create uniformity among...
I would hesitate to do that.
Okay.
Only because I've been striving all this long for consistency in the hours. And I think currently social workers come through, and you have no buckets, if I recall correctly.
Right.
So, I think if you want to make an argument against the cap, I think you can look at the social workers and say, there hasn't been an issue there, and telehealth has been going just fine. And then we have data that says it's really not an issue. And I agree. I think the experience should be well-rounded, and I don't know if we, convey that through legislation, or if we convey that through best practice FAQs. I'm not sure what the balance is, and it can be that we can get to the committee and we can show them the data and they'll go, oh, okay, and be fine with it. This discussion is really in the event of we run up against that brick wall. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I can go either way. But I agree. If we're going to touch social workers, I really think we need to take a look at that.
Okay.
And I don't know that we'll be able to get the data because we don't have them doing buckets.
Right.
And that's how their apps get through the process quicker. So.
Well, and it seems to me that if anyone's going to do more telehealth and less, it would more likely be someone in social work than it would be an MFT doing couples therapy. Not really sure how you're going to do couples, family, or child therapy through tele. Yeah.
That would be tricky.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, I've never taken the exam, but is it a disadvantage to have? Would it be a disadvantage to have all telehealth?
Yes.
I mean, so the testing would somewhat.
It might.
Weed that out.
Yeah.
I mean, weed it out.
Not really.
Not really.
No.
Not enough.
Okay.
Not enough. Kathy?
I just have a couple additional comments. One, I do agree that someone who gets all of their hours in one fashion is not properly trained, but a person sitting in an office who gets all their hours with one type of client, one type of issue, I don't think they're trained either. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is there, you know, what Tim Shannon's always saying to me, what are we trying to fix here? What's the issue? So I guess what I'm posing to you all is there some crisis or is there some problem that needs to be addressed? As I said, if there is an issue with the non-bar or with the non-cap on the social workers, I have never heard of anything. What I'm wondering is, I think there's a difference between the Business and Professions Committee saying you have to do this. So I do think this committee needs to be prepared if the legislator says you have to do something. But if the legislature doesn't say that, is there an urgency? Is this something that maybe the BBS could do a little bit longer research? Social workers, LMFTs, LPCCs, and see, is this something necessary? Because if there is a consumer protection, I think your associations would be on board to protect the consumer. So I just... Again, I think it's wise to come up with a solution if the legislature wants some kind of cap, but if they don't, do you need to rush it today? Does it have to be in this bill? Can it be something that you continue to discuss and maybe do in a more thorough, less rushed manner would be my request.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jen Lee?
Jan Lee Wong, NASW. Well-balanced, well-rounded training is wonderful. It's an ideal, but this fine gentleman behind us said he did not see any, correct me if I'm wrong, any families or children during his training. So
Well, he knew of people,
He
yeah.
knew of somebody.
Yeah, he knew of people.
Or he knew of people, right. And are those bad clinicians? Did they get
Well,
disciplined?
right.
You know, I mean, so you have to be careful when you make these wide sweeping statements. Pretty soon you will want to regulate everything, you know, and contrary to popular belief, social workers are not wanting to regulate everything. In this area, we would prefer less regulation because it's so impersonal. The regulation is one size fits all, and everybody has to do it this way. And we made up some numbers, so that's why it should be done, because we made up some numbers in some hotel room in Orange County. So I also think there's probably some research, I haven't done it, I could help if the board needs help, on efficacy of telehealth, and perhaps in mental health services.
There's some research on it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it's
efficacious.
Yeah. Well, I think it'd be
Exactly.
helpful to kind of look at where there's some studies that looked at the training of the people that were delivering telehealth and how effective was the training. Maybe there is some studies in that area, maybe there isn't, but that's the way public policy should be determined.
Yeah,
You know,
there
the
is research on that, and there's training on it specifically in some programs who do a heavy emphasis of telehealth in their training
Good.
programs, at least in counseling.
And also, I think it'd also be important to bring some local content and input in. USC has had a telehealth program for MSW students, interns, for a number of years now. And they probably have some research and some experience on this. And these are not postgraduate, these are pre-graduate students. So, you know, they're local. And, of course, their program is global because it's a virtual program. So they will have some rural, they will have some other state and perhaps other country experience. So it might be helpful, when I say local, that means it's not far for them to travel. Actually, their campus here in Orange County is like across the street.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Olivia.
Hi, Olivia Lowy from AMFT, California. I promised Angela Khan I would deliver the message that she wishes she could be here, but she's on spring break, and so she's not coming today. We agree with what Kathy and Jan Lee were saying. We also don't want to get back into buckets. And doing that, having that cap, goes there.
Yes.
So it may be useful to see if we have a problem that needs to be solved.
Thank you very much. One thing that concerns me, Kim, is that the lack of regulation around telehealth. I would be less concerned about not having a cap and letting that kind of fall where it may, as long as we had better regulation or more explicit regulation around what is an appropriate way to do telehealth. That, to me, would protect the consumer more, because probably the person that maybe 1% who would do all 1750 hours if they could of telehealth, let's say they got it at an agency in their practicum in their master's program and then got hired there, that very rare thing, and never went anywhere else, they're probably going to just do telehealth anyway. So and they probably don't feel comfortable. So I am more concerned about making sure, like, it's explicit, the rules around, like, you shouldn't be doing therapy with someone out of state unless you're licensed in that state. But then the question is, what if it's your client that you've been seeing and they're out of state temporarily? So we haven't argued those points yet.
And to your point, we are working on those regulations. They're going to be presented to the Policy and Advocacy Committee in a couple of weeks, and they speak to the very things that you're talking about, how it's delivered, when it's delivered, under what circumstances, just some framework to start, because you're right, telehealth has taken off, and I think a lot of us are chasing it to catch up, to find the best practice, what's appropriate, and how you protect the consumer. So we're moving forward on that. And then this committee will be deciding what's appropriate for supervision via telehealth as well, most likely at the June meeting. So I think the pieces are moving together.
Okay.
And so it's more, I think at this point, with this particular discussion, is it a leap of faith that we want to take and move forward with the bill as is, having, faith that perhaps before the B&P committee, that the presentation of the data that we have thus far, and to cite that there hasn't been an issue with social workers, is that going to be enough to sway or at least allay the concern a committee member may have and move forward, given that we've all worked on the legislation and crafted it with numerous input, a lot of input from the stakeholders as well as our licensees. Or do we just feel more comfortable putting a number in our back pocket to pull out in the event that our backs are up against the wall? And, if our backs are up against the wall, then, do we then the decision becomes, do you want to take that number? Or do you want to throw it back to the committee and see if we can't craft something a little better that appeases everybody, rather than, I know we're all anxious to get rid of the buckets, but I don't, given the thoughtful way we arrived at in the proposed legislation so far, I just personally, I would be hesitant to start throwing back in, okay, minimum, maximum.
Yeah, I think if we agree not to do another bucket with a maximum, if we agree that, I'm not saying we have agreed that,
I don't think we have.
But if we were to agree that, I don't want to create a number to make the Business and Profession Committee happy, because they're not the therapist doing the therapy. So it's a good question, and I think we should have a good answer. And if they require more research, then we'll do the research and delay the process. But I don't want to be doing it because they made us do it.
Correct.
Betty.
I may be stating an obvious here, but Sarita, I think, brought up the point that how would you do family and couples therapy via telehealth, which you can't.
Yeah, you can't.
And I believe that's the one bucket we did keep, was that we did require that they have at least 500 hours
Right.
of seeing children, families, couples. So there's a part of me that says, well, that's 500 hours that we know they're going to get face to face.
For MFTs, but not LPCs.
LPCCs will need it if they want to see couples and families.
Or become a supervisor of
Or
MFTs.
become a supervisor. So the likelihood that they'll get those, I would say
A larger
a large
percentage.
percent will, yes.
So I guess my concern, and I'm glad that, the point that Jan Lee made about USC's program, and that's how social work programs perhaps might also be set up. But I think the sort of the accompanying piece to this is also what kind of training you have and what kind of supervision you have and what kind of system is set up in place for you to be able to provide that telehealth. And yes, USC has the resources and they've created this program, but there's a lot of programs out there that are training people. And then people who graduate and are interns and are gathering in their hours in various kinds of locations. There's not enough structure in place to ensure that if they're doing telehealth, they're doing it appropriately and around those. So either we have regulation that accompanies that piece, or I would feel that I think for the traineeship, it really does make sense to not have
So,
an open limit.
Sarita, would it be more comfortable knowing that we're going to discuss supervised telehealth, and certainly as we talk about not just the supervisors doing supervision electronically, but also that how supervisors may need to supervise interns doing telehealth. Since that's part of our next conversation, would you feel comfortable not putting a cap today?
I don't know what stage it is, so I guess I have a question about that. If it goes to BNP on Monday and it gets passed, do we still have an option?
We can
I mean,
always
if
go
we
back
say-
next year with a new bill and go, hey, we did some research and we need a cap. We can do that next year. The question is, do we need to make the decision this moment?
Well, so that's what my question
Yeah.
is. Is it possible to delay whatever's happening in BNP?
On Monday.
And if we get more data, I'm all for data-driven decision-making. Then
Well, it goes to BNP on Monday, the Senate, and then, if they pass it, appropriations, I think is the
It would
next
go to
step.
appropriations and then
And
over
the
to the
Senate.
assembly
And then
side.
it goes to the assembly side.
So we don't need to do anything, I don't think, right now. It's still moving, but it's not at the finish line yet.
okay, so then I guess we have time to
Yeah.
gather some data before, and then still be able to have input.
What kind of data do
Yeah.
you want to gather?
I don't know. Maybe there isn't enough time for that. I mean, do we want to ask people this question? If there was no limit on the number of hours you could get, your intern hours you could get by telehealth, do you think you would exceed the 375? Would you want to get all your hours like that? Some investigation.
I think the data tells us no.
Well,
Some
but
of
I
it.
guess Christy
Yeah.
brought up that point that, is it because there's a limit that people are not going towards that?
Well, but
or-
the only 6%, 6 of the 100, even reach the limit,
Yeah.
right? So 6% may exceed it, but 94% didn't even reach the limit and had the option to. And again, it's not a problem for social work. Like we haven't gotten any cases
Yeah.
that are because of telehealth that's why they're in trouble.
So I don't know that much about social work, but I think I do because I work with some people. I think the nature of the work that social workers do is a little different than what MFTs do. And some of that social work definitely can be done on the phone. And I think it's just part of how we do casework and social work, and particularly in community settings. So, but therapists, I'm not so sure that they don't do a lot of casework, and they don't need to necessarily be doing phone calls. So I sort of feel that the face-to-face is really, really important. That's just my point.
So since we still have a few more hoops to jump through even after Monday's hoop. If the staff could do a survey of interns, a quick and dirty survey saying if you could do telehealth, well, no, you maybe do a range. Like, would you, if you in doing telehealth, if you could, would you do 500 less than 500 hours? Would you do between 500 and 1,000? Would you do between 1,000 and 1,750? Would you, that kind of thing? Maybe put it in ranges so they can just do a quick click. We can send it to the schools. It might be good to also survey the trainees because they're the next generation anyway that this is going to really impact.
Actually, no.
I'm sorry. No, are these settings really available for them? I mean, is telehealth, are they able to, I don't know how to.
Well, it must have been for 6%.
6%, yeah, but can a lot of interns get that sort of,
What the worst case scenario would be them trying to do their therapy on the phone the whole time.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
But like the supervisors and stuff who are, the settings that they're working in, do they allow, first of all, for the telehealth, and then...
Looking at the supervision survey, 20% of the supervisors concern me.
Well, yes. But
well,
so 20% may not be watching over them in a way that the other 80% watch.
That's another story. We'll tighten that up hopefully later. But yeah, that's true.
I actually was thinking more than surveying the trainees or the interns. It's the supervisors that also should weigh in on this because you know what's sort of what you're hearing from them. But Kathy, you like.
I was just going to, two comments. If you do any kind of survey, I would recommend doing it across the licensures just so you have all the data versus one license. I sound like a broken record and I apologize. I just think that what we learned from the history of these, the reason the MFT license specifically got so crazy is someone came up with an idea and stuck a bucket in and there wasn't really a whole lot of policy behind it. We ended up with all these buckets, which we're trying to undo now. And so I think to now randomly stick in another bucket off one survey, which thank you for doing it, it actually was helpful. I just encourage the committee and the board to really think this process out. If next year, you did some studies and then people were saying, if I can do all of them, I'm getting on the phone and I'm never seeing a human being again. And that's what people are saying. Or you do some research and the efficacy is shown to be very poor, or you do some research and there are some consumer issues. I don't think you're going to see a lot of pushback from the associations who also want to see consumer protection. I don't particularly have a beef in this, but I think my concern right now is just listening. The way it's being thrown together is what is concerning me. Right. And I don't know that I hear your concern that if we wait another year, then it's another year. But truthfully, a year's not that long in what's going on. This bill isn't even really going to effect for 5 years for most people anyways. So I would just encourage the committee to, before making a decision, to add back a bucket, just to make sure it's fully vetted, fully researched, fully discussed amongst the committee as well as the board. And if that doesn't happen in the next 4 months, I don't think it's the end of the world. And I can say Camp would absolutely stand by the BBS if next year they have research saying, look, this is a problem. We would work with you. Jan Lee already said he'd help with research. We would be happy to help where we can. Just I hope you give it mindful consideration and not jump at a number. So thank you.
I think what I'm hearing is it sounds like I think if we did a survey right now, I don't think we're going to find anything much different from what we're finding on the sample we did just from talking to our evaluators. I think that down the road, if telehealth becomes more commonplace, there's the potential. It might be something we want to keep an eye on. But the door on running legislation to fix that problem doesn't close just because this bill goes through. If we identify it being a problem in the future, we run legislation all the time to fix problems. So it's not like it's something that we have to decide right now. I think that we've gathered some data that show that people aren't even coming close. If that changes in the future, there is a possibility to revisit the issue.
Go ahead, Sarita.
So I'll just say you guys convinced me.
Okay. So what I would like to have staff do, though, is to please do look at the research that exists in journal articles right now, because it is a growing field. I'm getting dissertation surveys at least once a month on people researching this. So you may have to pull at the dissertation level instead of the journal article level, because it hasn't gotten there yet. But I think that doing some research would be really, really helpful.
And I'll just add that, part of the reason why I'm saying I'll back off is also because I think it's a supervision committee, and we'll be talking about supervisors.
Yes. Right.
And they're supervising people who are doing this. So
Right.
I think there is a check and balance in there. So.
Thank you. Yes.
I have something that hasn't been brought up with the telehealth, and that is, if it goes out that you can do all your hours telehealth, then when clients want to cancel because they're sick or they have problems, there's traffic, they call the therapist and they say, well, let's do it over the phone. So I think that over time we may see an increase of having a lot of sessions over the phone. It makes it easy for everybody, but I think that could then become a bigger issue. I know a lot of interns would choose to do things over the phone rather than lose their hours. And so that then becomes a default modality because they've got unlimited telehealth hours, and then the client says, oh, well, I think this is really great, why don't we continue to do this? I really see that as watering down the clinical practice part. In addition, telehealth's going to become bigger and bigger. I mean, the technology is growing, so the opportunities are there, and it really concerns me that it would be allowed kind of in an unlimited way, because I'm an old traditionalist. I think people need to be trained one-on-one psychotherapy. Building the relationship we know is the primary factor in outcome in all psychotherapy. Can you effectively build the relationship with telehealth? I mean, you said there's some efficacy studies that show telehealth's beneficial. Okay. I can't imagine the depth of the relationship can be achieved, and that's the primary factor in outcome in psychotherapy. There's no question about that. Yes. Research, there's 50 years of research supports that.
Yes.
But my bigger concern is the thought that I know so many interns that would then encourage clients to do stuff over the phone, and then the clients would like that, and then they would want to do more phone conversations.
Yeah, so I think the conversation isn't over. I think the conversation is we need to do more research. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have that same bias. The research is absolutely 100% that the number one contributor from the therapist's perspective, not from the client perspective, is the relationship, and that needs to be built in a face-to-face venue for doing deeper work.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of non-deep work that I think where the efficacy comes from, that they're doing more. I don't want to say CBT. It's bad CBT, let's put it that way. They're using those techniques to give people skill building. It's more coaching than therapy, but it's still under therapy.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you. So I think we're at a consensus right now for if you could research the literature on that, that would be really helpful. And for today, and what we can tell the Business and Profession Committee, if it should come up, is that what we know so far is we haven't had any consumer issues as a result of it. It appears, based on a random survey, that about 6% even use it moderately and might use it more, but the other 94% are not, and that we're going to continue to research it and follow it and track it. Would it be possible to track how many hours people did telehealth, but not use that as part of the formula for doing whether or not they're eligible for their exam? Because that way we can collect that data.
I mean, we could always,
You can do a check mark. I mean, just
Yeah.
a simple
just-
old school manual
Yeah.
check mark or
on the form that they submit to us, sure, for the hours.
So I think that might be helpful to monitor consumer protection, or to see if it becomes an issue. Like we'll watch, there's certainty that the number of hours of telehealth is going to increase. That's an absolute given. So that as we watch those numbers increase, are we seeing more, relationship boundary issues or whatever? So we can start to join those two pieces if there's an issue to track and make sure that there's not a problem or an abuse of it.
Yeah, what we would need to do, we would need to modify the supervised experience form, which will be modified anyways, and we would leave that line item about telehealth, so we would need to have them continue to track it.
Right.
it needs to be there, otherwise they won't know to track it.
Yeah.
And then we would ask on their exam application for the telehealth, even though
It won't count.
mean anything. It doesn't
so
count.
it won't slow down the process
No,
for
but it's
getting it.
there so
but
we
it's
can
there
start
so we
building
can
the
collect
data.
the data.
Right.
Okay. I think we can move on. Whew, spicy. All right. Let's do the discussion regarding supervisor and supervisee survey results. Very interesting data. So, Steve.
Well, I'm glad you say so. We finally got the survey out. That was in March 2nd, 2015. Put the survey out, and I waited until March 24th to collect some of the responses. And this survey was to kind of see what the supervisors and supervisees are experiencing out there in their experience, gaining their experience, and kind of how supervisors view their role and what they think about some of the changes we have been discussing within this committee here. There were about, I think, I had it in there, 418 responses from the supervisees and approximately 357 total responses from supervisors. Now, not all of those were complete answers. I think some people started to get past the first or second question, and then they just didn't have time to finish it or just didn't want to even continue. So all this data is based upon complete answers, people that went through all the answers. So the supervisee summary, the supervisee survey was about 20 questions, and it asked, first of all, kind of in each of those, it was like a demographic information first. How long have you have your intern number? Is this your first or second intern number? And I think we got a fairly good response. Kind of the populations that we currently have in licensees, even though it was a low amount of response, 300, I think in total we had 195 responses that were complete. But they kind of made up the representation of the populations we have in licensing. Marriage and family interns made up 54% of that. The associate clinical social workers, 34%, and the PCIs, professional clinical counselor interns, made up 12% of that. So I think it was fairly representative. And 195 respondents, which is 95%, were on their first registration. I don't know why I found that. I thought it would be less than that, but so that was kind of interesting to me. And two, I put down there too, the primary reasons they needed a second intern number. It's difficult to obtain these hours, as we all know, and that was kind of one of the main reasons why people put they are on their second or third intern number. Just kind of go through some of the findings. There, 60% of them reported they had more clinical hours than non-clinical hours. And average caseload per week was around 15. The range there, 2 to 67 cases. 67 cases seemed. A lot of this information, I could go back and do a better job at validating this and kind of piecing this out. But for the amount of time we were compiling this, I just kind of put down the raw stuff. So I think if we went back and validated, we get a little bit better stats. But due to the
My
time.
hope is that's a social worker who has cases as opposed to somebody doing 1 hour psychotherapy sessions.
Telehealth.
Every single week. Yeah.
Bluetooth, yeah, on their car. Yeah. So that was, 15. The three most common type of client types: adult, individual. That's in order: adult, individual, child and adolescents, and families. I think the other I had highlighted here, 250 respondents gained around 700 or almost 800 hours in public nonprofit agencies, and 98 of those respondents also gained 600 and around 50 in governmental agencies. So, I mean, that's not really, I think we knew that already. That's not really anything new. 78% of supervision occurred on site, and 4% occurred. The one thing that I want to put there is 4% occurred through video conferencing. which was kind of interesting. Regular feedback looked pretty good on a weekly basis. 81% said that they were getting regular feedback, but 19% said they were not, and that is concerning. So we'll have to look more at that.
And that 20% number pops up over and over and over again on both surveys.
Yeah,
and that's
so
a huge percentage.
That was kind of
a red flag.
Yeah, that was interesting. And only a little over half of the supervisors have asked their supervisees for any sort of feedback on how they're performing. So I think that also is kind of, I would think I would want more of that, just to have the experience, making sure they're getting the proper supervision. So the most common topics that were discussed during their feedback with their supervisors, law and ethics seem to be big. Areas of growth and the supervisee's strength. Those were really big percentage. So those are all being discussed, which is good. And cultural diversity, which I know is a concern, seems like more than half. It's been a fairly common topic between supervisees and their supervisors.
So, Steve, you jumped a bullet that concerned me was that only 22% got direct observation of a session.
Oh, okay.
And when you're talking, 3,000 hours
experience.
and they don't actually ever see them do therapy, ever, you don't know what you do wrong unless somebody tells you.
No, I guess that is, yeah. There's so much information in this. I think what I saw with this, with the information we collected, we're going to have further discussions.
Yes.
This is just a real quick overview of what we found, and I think for maybe each preceding meeting we can look at kind of the data and also the comments and bring those into the discussions fully, and kind of help us out with the discussions. So like that would have been a good one to address. What was the one? 78% of supervisees reported that they were satisfied with their supervisors, and 80% were satisfied with the responsiveness of their supervisors. So
there's that 20% again.
The 20%. And we actually also I have left the survey open still, so responses keep trickling in. So we might actually edit these currently what we have. The supervisor summary, once again we had 357 total responses, and 342 of those were fully complete. And once again, it kind of mirrored our populations. 63% were the MFTs, 125 were LCSWs. 37% were LCSWs, and 10% were LPCCs. And the range in actual years licensed, 2 to 46 years, which I thought was cool. And 15 years was the average of years licensed that the supervisor had, which I think was pretty good. That was a nice stat to see. And the average length that the licensee had provided supervision was 9.8 years. So we had some pretty well-seasoned therapists answer the survey, which was nice.
So what's interesting and biases the survey potentially is that really good therapists, really good supervisors who care are the ones who are most likely to do this.
Oh,
and
no,
those
that's
20% of supervisors that are not so good according to the supervisees are the ones who didn't answer a lot of this.
Well, and that's what, reviewing this stuff, that was my main thought. It's like, they're going to be answering it if they are good. And it's,
if they're going to spend 15 minutes answering this survey, they're going to be the good ones.
So that's what I was like, maybe I wish we would have, it's a hindsight, and it's like maybe we could have designed it a little bit different to attack more people. But,
No,
they're
fine.
still not going to.
It's fine.
Yeah.
It's
No, but
given
I
us
was
what we
thinking
need
about
to know,
that, yeah.
though. The supervisees told us.
And I think actually the comments, even though I just gave you a sampling in our future discussions, the comments I would like to bring those out topically and present those in the meetings, because there were some really good comments.
Yes, and diplomatic, well done.
Yeah, I was
instead of just
really
people
impressed.
Going off.
There was a couple of those, but not too many.
That always happens, of course. But
those are the incomplete ones.
yes.
So, 78 of the supervisors believe that they were prepared for being a supervisor, but
half of them were certified.
Yeah, actually, that was a lot of them were certified, and I think it really kind of what I got out of it, and I think I may have represented it in what I've written. It really, those good supervisors, the ones that wanted to respond to this, are the ones that were taking really proactive measures and making sure that they had, extra training. Some, did definitely say that, they only had the required training, but then went about and tried to get as much more they can so they can give the supervisees a better experience. So it really was, I think, it's upon the supervisors to really, do their own training and to seek that out. So, what was it? The 70% believe that the 6 hours required training coursework is not sufficient.
Again, half of them are certified and did
Yes.
way more than that. So
that's
20%
once again,
were,
that's. But the 15 hours those seem to be like kind of the most. And even then, it was kind of just as a starting point. 15 was good.
a starting point.
The starting point,
Because
and
it
then-
may not create too much of a burden.
No.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the extra training and stuff that we discussed. I think overall it was, and the certification, it was great idea, but if it's going to be implemented to create a huge burden, then it's probably not a good idea. In kind of both instances.
Yes.
71% believe that 6 hours required continuing education was of value. A lot of the responses, I think, kind of notified it was kind of almost just kind of a thing to put on your calendar, remind you to kind of, I have to, you know what, it's time, maybe I need to refresh on something.
Yeah, and I think we had talked about before maybe expanding what that 6 hours included rather than just coursework, that maybe supervision of supervision or case conferencing of supervision could expand the need for that.
And that's what they were talking about too, yeah, because the 6 hour coursework that they usually, it's not, the classes that it seemed like a lot are taking is just another review of law and ethics, and it's the same course that they had last year with a little bit of change to it. So it wasn't they didn't really see that necessarily the classes that they have taken as value, but the 6 hours of coursework, the actual requirement for that, they did see a value.
Yeah.
32% of the supervisors have charged for supervision.
Sad for the interns.
And trying to think of something else here that's good. I'll just go down. 18% of supervisors respond they do not ask supervisees to review their performance. Once again, 20%.
There's that 20%.
And so the ones that have usually do it on a yearly or quarterly basis.
So as you're approaching the theory of supervision, the way that when you put the comments of what theories people said they used, they were talking about their theoretical orientation for working with clients. Those were not supervision theories. You don't supervise doing Bowenian. You might do therapy doing Bowenian, but you supervise maybe doing developmental.
Okay.
Yeah, so they didn't understand that question, so don't get too excited about how many people put something.
I wasn't excited. I knew you would have fun with that. Yeah, I mean, to me it was
And then,
somewhat
of course,
Greek,
the 40% eclectic, which is just
eclectic was, yeah.
Yeah.
That give you some heartburn?
You called it, though. Yeah,
Go ahead.
One thing that was a little scary to me was the average number of supervisees that a supervisor oversees in a setting. 28 supervisees.
Yeah, you can't do that well.
And I mean,
That is a lot.
that's what I gleaned from the information. I'd like to go back because the charts that we used in SurveyMonkey, it was difficult to compile it, but just to make sure, I'd like to kind of revisit some of those
I'm
to
wondering
see.
if that is just group supervision.
It could be too, yeah. Well, and
You're at a nonprofit.
But it was interesting how few people looked at case notes.
That's scary.
So if you've got even 15 supervisees who are each seeing 10 clients, are you looking at all 150
yeah, you
files? That's legal documentation.
62% said they look at case notes.
Yeah, but that means 40% doesn't.
And that would explain the number of
Yeah, because we have had
violations
ethical,
we have.
a lot of records violations, so that really stood out to me.
It did me too.
There's a little over half were recognized as a supervisor by a professional agency, which was nice to see. They had nothing but good things to say about all the different pathways, not credentialing, but the pathways to get recognized as a supervisor. A lot of good comments back on that. And then the idea of supervisors registering with the board. Overall, I think people definitely, it looked like there was a consensus that it would definitely lend more accountability possibly. The major concern was the bureaucracy that would be added into somebody becoming a supervisor. They didn't want to see that as restricting. And a lot of the questions, too, they were kind of hesitant to even answer yes or no because they were unsure of what we meant.
Right.
So that was kind of
So
touching off from that. Yeah, and we don't know yet. So they were kind of hesitant, but I think the
So
people
what
that
we
said
know is
yes,
it has to be low bureaucracy.
low
if we do it.
bureaucracy, a checkbox. I don't know. but
Self-certified, maybe.
Self-certified, but that's what kind of. If it was low bureaucracy, I think there would have been more on the yes side. So I've included all the totals of the responses in there. And I don't know if there's any discussion. Anybody have any questions concerning the surveys? Or
So really outstanding job pulling this together,
It was
putting the
fun.
survey together, collecting the data, making this report, and then when I went back and read the details, I was even more impressed with your summaries. So thank you
good.
very much for your
Nice.
hard work on this.
It was fun, actually.
And so then the next step would be to kind of categorize for our remaining discussions the answers into those like supervision requirements or best practices or into those buckets.
And I think it's easier that way. I was trying to go through and read all the responses, but especially for the supervisor surveys, it was like 180, 190 comments, which it's really difficult to split out into some sort of categorization. But that'll be good because then if we know the topic that we're discussing, we can go through and scan and just pull the good
So that's what
comments
I'd
out.
like
Yeah.
you to do for our remaining
For the
meetings, is to
committee
kind of
meetings.
pull
Okay.
those data, because that's what this is really for, to help us make decisions going forward.
Mhm.
So as I was thinking about requiring supervisors to register for the board, I was thinking, well, maybe what we could do is when you re-up your annual, your every other year, semi-annual, whatever it is, renewal, not semi, whatever, every
Yeah,
other year,
biannual.
biannual, thank you,
right?
renewal, that you check a box that's saying, yes, I have met the requirements as supervisor, so then it's just part of that process.
process.
So then that doesn't, and I certify that I've met all the minimum requirements of education and done my continuing ed or whatever. So that way, it's not extra bureaucracy. It literally takes 5 seconds. It might be bureaucracy for us to establish it, but but for them to do it once it's in there, then at least then we can create a list from that check mark that other people can go look at if they wanted to look at.
Yeah, we're going to kind of.
We'll get to that some other
we're going to
time,
touch
yeah.
on that
Yeah,
a
we've
little
been-
bit later
yeah.
today. On ideas on how to glean that.
But that was just really very fascinating, and
good.
20% of the people scare me.
Now, I do have
It's not
a.
higher than you thought, so that's good.
And the question maybe for the committee and everyone up here, do we want to possibly publish that on the website with all the comments and stuff? With the comments, I mean.
No.
Not yet. Cool.
haven't completed the survey yet.
No, it's still going on. It's still going on. So okay.
Yeah, I think we
Just want to make sure.
I think we publish anything, maybe just a summary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
A
Summary.
one-page summary.
If we decide to do that, I don't think we're obligated.
I would be very
to-
cautious about
to
some
do
of
that.
those
Yeah. The
incredibly
comments.
negative
No comments.
comments
Well,
from the supervisors
yeah,
going
no.
anywhere.
No, and it's sort of our own working document,
Okay.
so I
Are
think
we-
we're okay.
Is there a time that you had in mind to close the survey?
I was originally going to put a time on it, but it doesn't hurt to keep it open.
Well, it'll fade in time in terms of people just forget it's there, and
And then the
I
survey.
think if you gave it 1 more month, then you could close it.
Yeah, and the Survey Monkey allows you to. I mean, I can I can parse out the ones with certain dates and stuff too. So it allows you to kind of make sure that you have static data and then so.
Okay.
Yep. I just had a quick comment that going forward, if we have stakeholders wondering or questioning why we are looking at supervision, I think it's good to have the data that shows that at least 20% of supervisees
Have room for improvement.
are reporting that they were not, that they did not feel like they were adequately supervised. And I think that that's a compelling reason for us to
Be here.
be here and to mess with the supervision requirements.
I don't know which of you came first. Dean? Okay.
I would just like to add my concern to yours about that 19% of supervisees that say they have not had weekly contact. Our statute requires, and I assume the others do too, 1 hour direct supervisor contact each week in which experience is credited in each work setting. If we've got, our 20% that aren't getting that, that's against the law.
Among other things.
Well, yeah, that's-
And poor gatekeeping, more frighteningly than being against the law.
And the other concern I have is the 28 supervisees for one supervisor, as Sarita brought up as well. I mean, maybe that's several groups.
Yeah.
But I think I shared earlier with this committee my dismay that there are supervisors that do nothing but supervise, and I call them itinerant supervisors, that just have this huge geographical area and they drop into each agency once a week. So when we start talking about telehealth, I mean, there's no supervisor there when that's going on. Maybe they get their 1 hour weekly contact, but that really concerns me. Mm-hmm. Now, we've limited private practice to 3 supervisees per supervisor, but it's completely open for the exempt agencies. Mm-hmm. And I realize we need to have enough supervisors and all that for our interns, but nevertheless, that doesn't sound like very good supervision.
Yes. Thank you.
Maybe we can address that somewhere along the line.
Yeah, that's
I'll
what.
comment on that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I saw that question in here, but I know our requirement is you get 1 hour of individual or 2 hours of group.
Right.
Right.
When we talk about further along that, I personally am uncomfortable with the or piece of it, because if somebody's getting only group supervision,
Right. They're not getting much.
they're not getting anything.
But, the law still,
Especially, yeah.
yeah, and their hours don't count. We can't let them through them if they count that 1 hour. So, there's that piece they have. You can do A or B, but the law still says you have to still have X number of individuals. So, but, yeah.
But, but there could be many weeks
Exactly.
in which somebody's just going with group, and then there are these supervisors who have these 28 supervisees.
And can't possibly be
They
looking
can't
at
possibly know, because the
case
supervisee
notes
then
or-
may have 28 cases.
Right.
What kind of supervision is that?
Then if each of them have 10 cases,
Right.
you've got 280 cases to look
And
at.
that's
You're
too
not
much
doing
for a
that.
supervisor. They can't supervise that. Yeah.
It's not adequate.
So maybe
So we all know we're scared.
Yeah.
80%'s doing really well, but the other 20%.
I wonder if that has to do with group supervision, and you're in a group of people, and there's not enough time, maybe.
Right.
So that's just one thought.
That was one of the comments that was made, or actually more than once, that they didn't feel like they had been listened to in a group, or someone was favored in a group.
And isn't that group limited to 8?
Yes.
So
But still, if one person has a crisis issue in 2 hours, you could spend the entire 2 hours on a crisis issue.
Yeah.
So then nobody else gets hurt. All right, Jen?
Jan Lee Wong, NASW. I'm a little uncomfortable with calling this survey representative of all the licensees and applicants
It's not.
or registrants. As you all know, this was not a formal research structured process where you looked at the sample size, you did some random selection and perhaps some stratification, and then applied some statistical measures to evaluate reliability and validity. So when people are saying, oh, this survey represents everyone, it doesn't. In fact, this survey is kind of self-selected.
Yeah,
believe,
I think
right?
I started with that by
Yeah.
saying that
Yeah,
it was
exactly.
self-selected, yes.
So when you get the results from the survey, I would qualify by saying, of the people that responded,
Yes.
here are the results. So when you're throwing the 20% figure around,
Yes.
you really want to say, of the people that responded, 20%. And you need to point out that 461 or 375 were the numbers of responses, of which some of them were not complete responses. That way, we don't jump to a policy conclusion that this represents everybody in the database.
Right.
Because it doesn't.
No, I think it didn't really represent everybody in the database, but I think it does follow the licensing population trends that we have. And I think that which was what struck me, not that we had surveyed everyone and here's a good sample, but the bulk of the responses came from the LMFTs, which is the bulk of our licensees and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
that's
Which is different.
Well,
yeah.
that's a descriptive.
Right.
That's not a research
No.
outcome.
No,
It's a
and we're not
descriptive.
research specialists, but we're doing the best we can.
Yeah,
But it is.
and I-
But the data is useful.
Yes.
But
Well,
I agree. We need to be very careful about making it clear that it's descriptive data and not an experimental method.
Right. And the other thing is, for example, there appeared to be a lot of certified people responding, certified
Yes.
supervisors. Well, then that might bias some of the answers.
Yeah.
Where they
That's
say,
that's what I said. This is skewed positive and still 20%.
Exactly. So we need to be clear about what we're saying rather
Yes.
than saying this is what everybody is saying, because this isn't what everybody is saying. I do agree this is very valuable, and I appreciate the job that you did. This is, you're not in a university doing research level, work in a university. No, yeah, nobody has time.
I won't let you.
I wish I had the time to take that.
But to me, this is extremely useful for quality control, because when you look at the comments and when you look at some of the results, if you can identify an area that might be useful, to set some policy as a form of quality control, I think that's very important. And I don't know if it's possible, but it would be helpful to have more cross-tabulation so that we can see answers by license type or by registration type. I know that's extra work, and I don't know if SurveyMonkey is easy to cross-tabulate or not.
Yeah.
And that's actually, I started to, for this report, I didn't have the time to do the cross-tabulation, but you can. I mean, and that's one thing I wanted to see, kind of get that licensee who had good, well, for the supervisees, who had a good experience and where do they fall in and stuff, and then for the supervisors too, we could look at the certification and how did they answer the responses and stuff.
Yeah, so let's say the 19-20%, whatever it is, the dissatisfied people, maybe they had certified supervisors and they were still dissatisfied.
Sure.
Yeah, but we don't know that unless we do the cross-tabulation.
And the settings too is what I kind of wanted to see too. What was the within the settings? How did they have a good experience with their supervision and stuff?
Yeah.
So that was kind of the one I want to look at further.
I mean, statistically, that there are going to be dissatisfied people all across the board
Yeah.
anyway. But what was fascinating is how often the roughly 20% came up, not just on the supervisee, but on the supervisor, like things, the way they answered. I was like, oh, there's that 20% number again, that they're not looking at case notes or that they're not.
Well, I mean, that could be self-selection.
Again,
The people
yes,
who
absolutely,
had
it is self-selection.
complaints in these areas, they were the ones.
Right. Well, that's why I was saying the supervisees. I was like, okay, this is biased to the unhappy people. Maybe would be more likely to do it than the happy people. But the supervisors, my assumption, which is not statistically supported, is that the good supervisors would be more likely to answer it than the really, really weak supervisors. And still there was a 20% number that kept up with the supervisors who did answer. So that scares me because I think the really bad supervisors probably didn't do the survey.
Well, you know, obviously.
That's why they did them incomplete. They're like, I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, Steve's going to do some additional work, so I think that's wonderful. Also, I think at some point you do want to close it.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
then do the analysis, rather than kind of do the analysis while it's still open. Because even though it might be infinitesimal, each new response changes the statistics a little bit. So you want at some point to stop.
So when did you open it again?
March 2nd was open, and then I took all survey responses from March 24th. So we could probably follow it up with, I'll just do
Maybe close it at May 2nd or something? The 60 days seems, I mean, I can't imagine somebody hanging on to an email for 60 days and going back to it. If they haven't looked at it, it's gone. Yeah.
So I think,
Okay.
I think Jandy makes also a good point, if I got that correctly, is that I think before we let the results of this survey inform any policy implications or put in certification required or something else or around supervision requirements.
Oh my
I think
God,
we do
supervision,
need to-
certification required. The
But you know what
agencies
I'm
freak
saying,
out,
but
yes.
For whatever, or settings, or whatever limits we want to put in, I think we need to close the survey, do a proper analysis, do the cross-tabulation, and see if there's some patterns emerging for MMFTs or social workers or whatever, and then let that inform our next steps.
Well, would it be appropriate then, let's close the survey May 2nd and then have everything tabulated and analyzed for the June meeting?
Yes.
Is that?
Yeah, no,
enough
that's
time?
Yeah, sure.
It's a month.
Sounds good.
It's a month.
And I mean, even with the stratification and stuff and going in there and using, I think still, what I view this, and I think we're all kind of on the same page, it just kind of opens or just accentuates the conversations that we're going to have. I mean, I'm not going to go up in front of, I don't think we're going to use this to go up in front of the legislature and say, hey, we can't, because with the population, even if we had 1,000 responses or more, it's still not, we have 100,000 licensees. It's not, I don't know. It's not a good sample size, but.
Well, and even with the weakness of potentially 20%, at least from this survey, I think about the 2,000 cases the board gets of complaints per year out of the well over 100,000. So now it's 2%. So even despite, and half of those are usually DUI related. Yeah, so, and they were things that happened before they even started their master's program. So you're looking at really only at 1% that we're trying to just tweak it up a little bit for that 1%. Okay. Kathy.
Rita and Jan Lee said what I was going to say. So
Okay.
I'm just sitting here.
All right. All right, so now we're just we're using this data to move forward to help us make further decisions. I think we need to take maybe a quick 10-minute break, and then we'll continue on with the meeting. All right, so we'll make it like an actual 10-minute break. I really want to start in 10 minutes from now. Okay. I think the planets are misaligned. All kinds of chaos are happening here. All right, maybe no, full moon's passed. All right, so next on the agenda item is item 6, update on Board of Psychology and the California Medical Board supervisor requirements. Kim.
So this is just a follow-up from a question that occurred at the last meeting was, what kind of requirements do they have? And so I reached out to my peers at the Board of Psychology and the Medical Board, and so this is really just sort of a circle back to the committee with that information. Essentially, the Board of Psychology does require some training of their supervisors. They're required to complete a minimum of 6 hours of supervision coursework every 2 years. And the supervisor has to certify under penalty of perjury that the completion of this course was done in that renewal period. And they also certify the completion of the coursework each time they complete a verification of experience form, for the people that they supervise. With respect to complaints, they get a handful, 5 to 7 a year, if that. And usually the complaints involve supervisors disciplining a supervisee, or they won't sign up on their hours, or that the supervisor showed favoritism to another supervisee. Not that dissimilar from what we see. Yeah, it was interesting that mirrored what we see. The California Medical Board, on the other hand, doesn't require any training to become a supervisor. And they don't maintain any statistics on complaints about supervisors. Usually it's, if they get a complaint, again, it's a handful, and it relates to the failure to supervise a physician assistant. So that was sort of the gist. And, the questions, that prompted these inquiries was really, as we were starting to think about requirements for supervisors, knowing that a psychiatrist could supervise our licensees as well as a psychologist, and we're going to put requirements in place. Does that extend to these two professions? And so that's.
And so here now we know that we're good with psychologists. Yeah. We're all fine there.
Yeah.
Psychiatrists.
Yeah.
So did I seem to recall that we did ask the supervisees who was supervising them on the survey, and it did seem that some people, very like single-digit numbers, had a psychiatrist supervise. Oh, good, you're looking for that.
That was.
I mean, I feel torn about, like, I don't want to restrict someone. A psychiatrist can be great supervisors when you're looking at, like, inpatient facilities and severe. And then we're not making that decision now. But maybe the restriction is that they need a certain number of hours that are, they can't do all their hours under a psychiatrist.
Correct.
1%.
1%.
1%.
Yeah. 1%. Well, I think that, social workers have to get a bulk of their hours. The training interns have to get a bulk of their. Yeah, that's not an issue. I thought we put that in place for the marriage and family therapists and clinical counselors. We didn't.
We had surveyed for an earlier committee meeting. We've done the survey, I think 100, looking at the amount of hours, and very few had it under a psychologist, and even fewer under a psychiatrist. It's not something that's super common.
Yeah,
So we probably don't need it. So then we'll be slightly hypocritical, make requirements for our people, but not make them for the psychiatrists.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, I mean, if it's not showing to be a problem, like if the supervision issues came up every time with a psychiatrist, then we could have a conversation. But it doesn't seem like I would doubt that anyone's getting 100% of their hours under a psychiatrist anyway. I don't think a psychiatrist would want to do that.
No, and I'll be honest, the forms, the experience verification forms I've seen, it's more common for me to see a psychologist than it is to see a psychiatrist. So.
Okay. Oh, yeah, Steve.
Just as a point of information, a psychologist is not required supervision training if he or she is not supervising.
Right.
So therefore, if a psychologist supervises an MFT trainee or intern, they may not have had the supervision training, unless they're also supervising a psychology supervisee. So now I don't know what the numbers are in terms of how many psychologists are supervising MFTs, but when you say it's not an issue for psychology,
that makes sense.
You are forgetting that I, as a psychologist, can have no supervision training and supervise MFTs because of the way the law is currently written.
Okay.
Unless I'm supervising.
So we write the law to make sure that.
There was 11%.
11%.
Yeah, so that's an issue. We want to make sure that they've had the supervisor training and continuous CEUs.
And chances are that 11% is all, they may also be supervising psychology, so maybe half of them have the training. But again, that as a psychologist, I'm not required to have the training unless I'm supervising psychology.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So just a point of information.
That's a really good point. We need to, because if we were to leave it as it is right now, there's a loophole in the law.
Right.
Yep. Right. So you'll close that loophole?
Yes.
Yes, we'll close the loophole and we'll chat with our friends at the psychology board.
Yay, thank you very much. All right. Are we ready to move on to the next agenda item? 7, discussion regarding supervisor qualifications. Christy.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, our discussion is based on some past committee work and then the supervision survey results. So I tried to incorporate all of that here. And so as I mentioned earlier, we had some prior committee decisions, and I'll go over those briefly. Of course, supervisors have to be licensed in California in good standing, but what we also agreed is that they can count time licensed in another state toward the 2-year licensure requirement. The requirement for practicing 2 out of the past 5 years should not be changed, but we feel that language regarding competency in the areas of clinical practice and techniques being supervised should be added. And then we want to standardize requirements between the license types where possible. Doesn't always make sense to do that, but in a lot of areas it does. So I want to first start with supervisor training, the initial training and ongoing. So the length of the training. So we had basically 1 in 5 supervisors felt that they were not adequately prepared to supervise. So that was 78% that did, but then you have 22% who did not. So, and then we had 70% of supervisors felt that a 6-hour training was not enough for a new supervisor. 71% support the 15-hour minimum initial training requirement, and 71% agreed there was value in the 6 hours every 2 years of training. So based on that information, we are recommending that we increase the LMFT and LPCC initial supervisor training to 15 hours. That would be consistent with what LCSWs already do. And then the ongoing training of 6 hours every 2 years, we would recommend keeping that in place based on the supervisor survey results and some other discussions we've had. And then we would also recommend having that consistency with the social work profession and asking them to do the 6 hours every 2 years. So any supervision course would also count toward the licensee's regular continuing ed requirements of 36 hours every 2 years. The other thing that has come up is that we want to somehow make sure that the course actually lasts for the number of hours that we require. So if you take an online course, you have to actually spend 6 hours as opposed to one that you can get through in
Just take the test without looking at the course, which so many CEs are like that.
Right. So do we want to stop here and talk about length?
I think the changes that we've had in our CE program is probably going to take care of that quick flyby through the click, take the test, because the approval agencies have stringent requirements in terms of reviewing that type of coursework, as well as if you're an approval agency under DDS after we've looked at the national groups, they've had to demonstrate that they'll meet that same requirement. So, as we phase out in the next 2 years, I think that's going to be less of a concern. Just a comment.
Makes sense.
So let's take this one piece at a
This is a real quick point of information. You said the supervision requirement was every 2 years. Have you changed the wording in the licensing regulation? Because the regulation, as I recall, says every licensing cycle, which while every cycle is 2 years, it's not really 2 years, because if I take my supervision training on day 1 of my licensing cycle, I'm covered for 2 years. And then if I take it on day end of the next 2 years, I've got a 4-year time frame. So I don't know if you've changed that. Psychology definitely says every 2 years, date to date. MFT regulation have been every licensing cycle. I don't know if that, if it's an issue, but you were saying every 2 years, which is not exactly correct.
Thank you.
Unless that's changed.
I'd have to look at the exact language of the statute, but
Can we clean that up?
Yeah.
Can we clean that up, please?
Yeah, so we want it to be 2 calendar years is what we're instead of renewal
Renewal cycle.
we want it to be renewal cycle.
No, we
No.
want it to be every 2 years.
Every 2 calendar years.
Because
Okay.
renewal cycle, you could do it every 4 years.
Got
Just a few days short of 4 years.
I would say, so actually all of the requirements are every renewal cycle, right?
I would like to see it every renewal cycle.
So you don't mind
whether
if
it's
people
a
go
law and
4
ethics
years?
training-
Because how, we would need to start tracking if they're a supervisor or not.
That's true.
I mean, we don't have that currently.
What if we look at that, look at the law?
Yeah, let's take a
Kinda.
look at that and kind of see
And
how
bring
we
it
might be
back.
able to.
Maybe look at the regs for the BOP.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see how they do it. Because right now your regular CE is a renewal based on renewal cycle. So if we do this differently, I don't know if that will. We need to think about that.
Or, yeah, qualify it every renewal cycle without exceeding 2 years or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
Just even though it makes sense and it does seem like 4 years would be a long time, it may be that we're adding a lot of complexity for the tracking for a problem that may or may not really even exist. I mean, I just have some concerns about that. I mean, the chances of someone manipulating that system,
Has to have a really good memory.
I just find it. I mean,
That's
we've been trying so hard to not add complexity and craziness to a system. I'd love to see us change the supervision itself, but I think we may be splitting hairs and getting too crazy with trying to control that. That's just my thought on it.
And I think it might also be difficult to enforce because if we were to audit somebody and saw that, oops, they forgot the 2-year mark, so they took it a month late, what would we do? Would we would there be a penalty? Would we reject it and make them take it over? I mean, they've already taken it.
That's
Something to
why
think
I
about.
want to go back and flush that out so that when we come back, we can present, okay, this is how it is now, this is what it would look like, what's the impact? That's easier for us to deal with.
Because we wouldn't be able to remind somebody within their renewal cycle, oh, therapist X, you have to take your CE now.
So we can look at the psychology law as well, see how that works.
My only point is, at the rate of so many changes going on all the time, if the supervisor is not kept up with supervisor changes, there's going to be that lack of consistency. So you don't want that to affect the interns as well.
Correct. Yeah, that
Right.
brings up a good point. And
For
I
the
think-
people who might
Yeah.
be clever enough to work the system that way.
And they're out there.
Yeah, I think it's probably that 1% though.
Uh-huh.
So I want to take a step back and start with the increase of 15 hours. And it speaks to part of maybe course content, because somewhere I think I read that part of the 15 hours in one of the trainings included supervision of supervision, so that people wouldn't be restricted to sitting in a chair for, I don't know, I don't know if we can
talked
split
about
out.
it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it's something I think we should talk about more if there's some interest in allowing that. Maybe when we get to the course content section, we can talk about that, or have it should be interactive. Because there are some other states who allow some supervision of supervision.
Right. So I know one of the difficulties about increasing it that showed up in the survey and has been brought to our attention in other meetings is the concern that it's undue time or stress and time that people can't invest that that amount of time, and there aren't enough supervisors. So that's one argument. And on the other argument, I'm not sure that a lot of supervisors fully appreciate their gatekeeping responsibility, and that in 6 hours it's not really adequate to get you springboarded into the supervision. But I'm just throwing out those two sides. Jan Lee?
Jan Lee Wong, NASW. First of all, the word gatekeeping is, just responding to what you just said, is probably not the most accurate word, because this board has passed a policy that if person's done the hours, the supervisor must sign off on the hours. So
They can refuse.
they can refuse, but there's consequences for refusing because there's no quality control mechanism in place.
That's
the
what we're going
board
to try to add.
Well, then you're talking about more board staff, more
Maybe
workload,
not.
et cetera. Well, basically, from a practical standpoint, most people just sign off. They don't want to go through a lot of hassle. I think it would be helpful. I'm trying to do this at the beginning so we don't go down the road of every 6 hours every 2 years. And the reason why is...
I want to start with just the 15, increasing 15 first before we get to the 6 hours every 2 years yet.
Well, this is related to that.
Is it? Okay.
Because you're talking about the content of the 15, right?
Well, not
Yeah,
yet.
no.
Not yet.
So
Maybe
just
we
the
need-
number of
Just
hours.
the number
Well,
for
actually-
MFTs and LPCs, supervisors to have to be
We'll
up
come
to
back when
15 like social work. Stay there.
We're going to talk. Well, we're going to talk content
get
next
there.
because they do go together.
Right. But I guess I want to hear, so we are about to suggest 15 hours to take that to the board and vote on that. So yeah, Kathy.
Kathy Atkins, this is one that we really struggle with because we have different constituencies within CAFT, and so to encourage it is to protect one group and to discourage is to protect another.
Exactly.
I do think that given the supervisor who would be doing the additional hours can count those hours towards their CEs, while it limits them in their ability to choose what hours they pick initially on in their supervision career. We're just at this point talking about a one-time thing. I think the pros of increasing the quality of the supervision and protection of the pre-licensees and the consumer outweighs the inconvenience to the supervisors in that one-time instance. So I think we would not be opposed to an increase in that 15 hours given the direct benefit to the pre-licensees.
Thank you. And I would also want to add that if we go in this direction, that we give a date in the future that's at least 2 years in advance to give the CE groups time to develop appropriate courses that meet the requirements and that can, to get that going. To make sure that it's meeting. So they need adequate time in the future. So way future date, not like next year.
So phase-in timeline.
Yeah, a long phase-in timeline would be good to make sure. So, Dean, how about you for LPCCs?
Particularly based on the survey results, I think we need to increase that first, that initial training, so we would support the 15 hours.
Okay, thank you. Olivia, how about for AMP? Okay, all right. So we would like to suggest then, maybe, is there anything on the 15 hours?
I presume the 15's.
He's happy. He's already got 15.
already got 15.
He's fine. He's good with the 15. That's why I wanted to start with what was simple. He's
We just have to
fine.
keep up with the social work.
That's right. We'll keep up with the social workers. Okay, so now we'll move to the 6 hour and possibly touch on the course content as part of that, but we'll get into the course content more. But the 6 hours go.
Well, as Christy said, they're actually related. So.
Yes.
I'm thinking after reading that wonderful survey results that classroom workshop or course content is not what we need here. So my idea is to kind of really try something new or innovative, and it's in the direction of a trend that is around, but maybe not so much in California, and that is competency standards. So rather than require every 2 years a 6-hour course, and it's interesting because some of the responses were, well, it's very important to know about law and ethics, but we already have a law and ethics requirement.
Well, but
So-
but the law and ethics requirement doesn't necessarily cover supervision. I mean, most of the ones I've been to
But
often don't.
But you could put that in the content. And how much does law and ethics / supervision change every 2 years? If you understand what I'm saying. Usually the board is making those changes, and usually it's, pardon me, but it's technical changes more than anything else. It's not really content related to competencies. So the idea would be it's okay to have a every 2 years kind of requirement, but how about make it a competency requirement and cover those areas that were in the survey? For example, supervisors don't know the client population. So every 2 years, as part of your competency requirement, you do something to learn about the client population. And you can't specify it in law because there are many different kinds of client populations. The elderly, youth, families, ethnic groups, diversity, bilingual, bicultural. But just make it who is the client population, and go out and learn something about a client population. The other one was consultation, which I think is great. I mean, that's very important. Go out and get some consultation, as part of this competency requirement. Supervisor training should be interactive, or role play, or whatever. Get some interactivity in there, get some role play. So rather than say, go take another course, get these kind of things that came out of the survey. And these kind of things would fit much better in a competency framework than a course framework.
I fully agree. That was my intention because of our last discussion and you bringing this up before, that it needs to be improving supervision competency as opposed to a 6-hour course. And that if audits were done, or just even if they self-certify, that they would self-certify that they have done it, and I don't know, maybe you threaten audits, but you just do so little that it doesn't impact staff. But it's enough to scare people, I guess. You know what I mean? Because you can 1 in 1,000, anyway. So, but I think that some of that would be useful, as you say, because they need to figure out what they need to know and what they need to work on. And I understand that there are some supervisor groups that meet, for example, monthly, that could meet this type of requirement, because to me that can be more fruitful as they talk about their struggles with their supervisees than sometimes taking a course. Also specifying somewhere in the language that they are still responsible for making sure they know all changes that occur in the law that impacts their work as supervisors. So that, that as long as that's the scary piece with losing an actual course. So if we say they're still responsible for knowing that, and that they can do 6 hours of demonstrate 6 hours of supervisor competency.
So it means that for me the question, how is that demonstration done? How are we measuring competency? I could be part of a supervision group and never say anything, or just there, or
I mean, we're going to have that no matter what we do, right? Because some people are doing those online courses and they just take the test and they don't learn a single thing. And some of the people spoke to it, those online courses don't even change. So it's still left up to it.
However, I think we're introducing something which says we require you to be competent, but then we don't have any. Right now, we're not asking for that. We're just saying, go through the motions, take a course if that's what you want to do, and that's the law. But if we're introducing something new here and saying that we are emphasizing competency, then I think we have to have a measure that goes with that too, right?
Well, to me, the burden of proof would be on the supervisor when they get audited. That they have to prove.
If they get audited,
Well,
here's how do we audit that?
Well, the audits, that it would coincide with a CE audit. It's, the random audits that we're going to resume doing here in about 6 months. So we would catch it at that point. But to Sarita's point, I know that Psychology Board is running regulations now about professional development. Part of that is the competency model that Janine is referring to. So it would be interesting to not only talk with them, but some of the other resources that we have on CE to see how they measure that, how that competency model is measured.
So can we start with that to evaluate? I mean, we don't have to decide this today.
So, but yeah, I think it would be interesting to see how that's measured. because I agree with Sarita. I think we're throwing things out there that we're going to require. Okay, and we're going to require it, and how to validate and verify.
So I think it might be helpful to revisit the Colorado program, licensure program, because they actually do have competency standards rather than CEU course standards. And they'll probably want to fly here, but you could definitely do it with this guy over here. He's quite expert at the webcam and the video and the audio. But it'd be interesting to see what their experience is and how they measure and all those things you talked about, catching people that are less than ethical.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I've been chomping at the bit over here, but I've had the experience in other areas of trying to measure competence, and it is a nightmare. You can hold people accountable for a process. You can hold people accountable for, content. But at the point that you say you're actually measuring competency, based on 6 hours of every 2 years, I think we would be letting ourselves in for a really hard road to hoe.
Yeah, so maybe we look at the two standards that we know exist and see how they're doing it, because maybe it's defined as like if you're doing a meeting, it needs to have an agenda or minutes or something like that.
It can be process driven. Yeah,
Yes. And it can always only be process driven, even if it's a CE, right? So it seems like, Jan Lee, that if we were able to expand to competence, however we do that you feel like the social workers would be okay with the six units of.
Yeah, some I don't know if 6 is the magic number, but because it could be 12, it could be 5, it could be 8. So the idea is to try to get away from the course hours framework. A course is so many hours to an activity. And I think if we look at the Colorado model, you'll see that they're actually talking about activities. And I think it's also important not to presume that competency means, if you're using this, that means you are competent after X, Y, Z.
Sure, right.
That's never the
Can't
case.
measure that,
Yeah, it's people doing things to help them become more competent, rather than you are suddenly competent after 1 hour of this.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So in a way, you want to get away from the 6 hours and just that they would have to demonstrate.
Yeah, if you pick the content areas, they can pick the activity.
Okay. All right. Olivia?
Okay, I'm chomping at the bit. And I like the idea of competency, but I'm not sure where we go with this, but I think we really need to consider the supervision setting when we're discussing this. As we know, most of our interns, a great percentage of our interns are placed in the public system. The public system is changing, incorporating systems of integrated care, and public system competencies are changing. So now, if you're working in those settings, the language and culture of primary care is something you need to know. A brief assessment, teamwork, coordinated care, a whole new, and boundaries. Law and ethics, boundaries change. Whole new set of competencies that are being developed and implemented at the national level as well as in California. So I'm concerned about that. You may know that at AMFT we developed a course called the Transform Supervisor, which was geared towards supervision in recovery-oriented settings. And the counties bought it from us, and community agencies did, and California Institute of Behavioral Health Solutions did, because they needed their supervisors to be retrained to be able to bring up the new generation of clinicians within these settings. So I'm not going to be quiet about that as we go through the process, because it just feels really critical to me.
So as we talk about the issue of looking at competency and that they demonstrate activities in those processes that we defined, number free, is that helpful to addressing the shifting landscape of mental health and health in general?
The numbers?
Well, taking away, for example, 6-hour CEU and replacing it with demonstrating the, activity in these types of processes.
Yeah, maybe, as Jan Lee said, I think we need to look at models that exist and figure out how competency is determined or measured. But we know it's a new playing field right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I just wanted to add too, I concur with Betty that I'm not quite sure what this is going to look like and how it will affect both the supervisor and the supervisees. But I think the model we have now, which is every 2 years you get these 6 hours, it's not working because of the continuing education programs I've seen across the board. They're generally geared really for someone who's starting off as a supervisor versus someone who is trying to continue their education or learn more. So I think it is, I don't want to say useless, but
Less valuable.
Less valuable, to say the least. Now, I don't think you should do away with continuing education requirements or some kind of competency evaluation, whatever that looks like. So we would definitely be for some kind of restructure of what the continuing evaluation is of the provider. I don't think what you have now is working. I don't know what Jan Lee's program looks like. I'm not creative enough to figure that one out, but I like where that's going, and I thank the committee to look into this. But I think there's a lot of work that's going to be done, probably more than just this committee this year. I think you're endeavoring on quite a big project there. But thank you for doing it.
And I just wanted to say that I think I've heard everybody agree that shifting away from 6-hour point and click done model to something that's activity and process based is going to be probably the best we can do to engage people actively in the process.
All right, so it sounds like for right now we need to do some research on that piece of it, with the possibility of really making some remarkable change to the ongoing development. And so I think we can move to course content now. I'm aware that you may have to leave here soon. Yeah. Okay. I don't think we'll get done, but we'll try.
Okay, so first we'll talk about the 15-hour initial training. The thoughts on, based on past, some of the research we looked at, and then some of our discussion in the supervision survey, these 7 areas are what looks to be, and part of this also came from the social work law, so we have some support already there. So it would be competencies necessary for new supervisors, practical application of supervision techniques such as providing effective feedback and implementing interventions, the supervisor-supervisee relationship, legal and ethical issues specific to supervision, knowledge of contextual variables such as culture and gender, familiarity with supervision theories and literature, and documentation. And especially documentation, I think, came out of the survey as a need. So you want to start? Let's start there with the 15 hours, since it sounds like the 6 hours is something we're going to be looking into separately.
Yes. I think everything that I had in mind is covered there in one of those categories. Comments on that?
Janley Wong, NASW. Again, do that invaluable survey. I think another area came up to mind, which is time management and organizational development, because many of the places where people are supervising and getting supervision are agencies, and some of them are pretty large. And so when the larger agency you get, particularly public, the more they become a bureaucracy, and especially in this area. So we need people, both supervisors and supervisees, to really work with the agency to develop a better venue and environment for supervision, and not just let it be, a bureaucracy. It's like, here's what you do, and we don't do anything else. How can we help these? We don't want to lose these settings, and we don't want to lose these supervisors. So, how can we help? And by incorporating it in the supervisor training, maybe they will get some ideas to go back and work with their agencies to work on those issues.
Okay, so what that makes me think of, and I don't know, this may be too much, but so in the counseling field, we have a heavy emphasis on having to learn program evaluation and understanding how to evaluate how your agency is running and how to evaluate what's going well and how it could be improved. And I'm thinking of that time management piece as being part of program evaluation, so that at least, yes, as you say, we can tell the supervisors about it, and the ones that have power, because eventually they become directors, many of them, can institute that for the people who choose to do that, because at least they'll know about it.
Charlene Gonzalez, DCFS LA County. I come from one of those monster agencies,
Yes.
and I just wanted to share that some agencies do what they can to add quality to this process. And one of the things that we moved in is actually consultation services for our clinical supervisors. We found the staff. We prorated it 3 months in advance, see how it's going to work, and see if it helps. My 2 cents for the training, the 15-hour we provide every year on county time to our employees, both MFTs and LCSWs. It's a 1 day a week for 3 weeks training, and it meets all this content area. Nobody complains about going, so it's clean. Everybody's starting, and we actually have staff go back. So they make the decision, I want it again, they take it again. I think the 6-hour update is a complication because people can't hold on to the time frame, and every 2 years a 6-hour update on supervision, it's really like what is it? It's every 2 years. Once you're doing supervision, it's more like a consultation update, dynamic process rather than a training. We moved into our 6-hour updates having a supervision focus with a content focus, like clinical supervision with the LGBT, working with the LGBT community, or clinical supervision dealing with secondary stress issues. We moved into that, but that stuff can be incorporated in the 36 CUs. I mean, having that 6-hour update, so if you changed up the 6-hour initial for MFTs, which our people already get the 15-hour, and then incorporate the 6-hour need within the 36-hour CEUs, it seems like an easy way to move forward on the issue.
Okay, thank you.
Now, so I also work for a community mental health agency, not a government agency like DFCS, and I would say across our county, all of the contracted agencies have interns of all kinds, MFT, doctoral students, psychology, all of that. I would caution a little bit in terms of introducing other elements. I think it's great for staff development. I'm one of those people who, from a clinician, became a manager. And there are opportunities to do other things. But I think there are so many requirements that, Medicaid and other populations that you have to deal with. There are so many regulations around that to require agencies to then have their supervisors provide all this extra stuff and have extra things in there that they have to teach their supervisees may cause people not to want to become supervisors in those settings. And there's a huge shortage of people able to supervise.
Right.
Furthermore, let me say that the clinician, who's the intern that's providing the services, there's a huge pressure on making what we call productivity, and that's just the nature of of the beast. That's how it is. There's a lot of pressure on a lot of things. So I think having too many other stuff, I mean, recognizing the fact that the majority of people are getting their internship hours in either public sector settings or contracted public sector settings.
So I think I'm a little bit lost with your comment, because when Charlene was talking, I was thinking that she was really talking about the release of the 6-hour every other year requirement, and as we're broadening it to competency, and it sounded to me like what you heard.
My comments were prior to what Charlene was saying.
Oh, okay. So
I was talking about when Jan Lee brought up bringing in other issues, and you talked about program evaluation.
right. So you're thinking program evaluation and time management for part of the supervision initial training would be too much.
Well, I just think putting more requirements on either the supervisee or the supervisor for what I would call non-clinical issues, while desirable, I don't doubt that at all, but I'm not sure that we should introduce those as requirements, because it really puts
As
a lot
part of the training, not as part of what they do. That they're exposed
and
to.
the training is to teach the supervisee.
Right, to let them know what program evaluation is and what that can look like. Not that they have to do it. Just, had you ever considered that maybe your agency could do some program evaluation? Not that they have to do it. Because if you don't know what you could do, then...
Well, I could go either way. I would hesitate. I mean, just if you work in the community setting, you kind of know the kind of pressures people are under, both supervisors
Sure.
and supervisees, and the client populations that we deal with in community mental health settings.
Right.
Not an easy population to deal with. So then there's
And
a
so
whole-
that
and
there's
people
no
are
way those
doing
groups
outcome.
can do that. Yeah, so
Yeah, I just think it's a lot of pressure
Right.
to require that.
to require the training for supervisors, not to require that they do program
The
evaluation.
training has to have, I mean, what are we getting trained for if we're not going to teach it to other people, is how I think about it.
Well, because some of the people might be establishing a new agency, and so they can build that in as they're building their agency.
Well, but I don't think that's the role of the clinical supervisor. That's, to me, that's an administrative piece of it. I mean, I'm very big on outcome evaluation, don't get me wrong on that. I think we want to see client outcomes, but if we're talking about setting up agencies or doing all this, I classify that as an administrative
Beyond.
responsibility, not a clinical responsibility.
Okay, and I guess what I'm thinking is, like, we have about 75 agencies that we work with at Cal State Fullerton. Easily 40 to 50 of them are run by our graduates who started as interns there, then became supervisors, and then became the director.
And I guess they picked it up along the way.
Well, no, they're not doing the program evaluation, which is why I would like them to have that exposure.
Can I just get a point of clarification? Because I think I got lost in the conversation. We're still talking about the content for the 15 hours.
Yes.
And so, am I hearing what you're saying is that you like the existing 7, but that adding additional time management, organizational, or program evaluation issues, that you could live with the 7, but that's that kind of, is that what I'm hearing?
Yes,
Okay.
I think in introducing
More
non-clinical, what I'm calling
variables.
non-clinical areas, and
Okay.
that's a debatable point. I mean, program evaluation can also be a clinical issue. I do understand that, but when you think about setting up agencies or running programs, there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't have to do with client care.
Well, and
That
it
has to
sounds
do with
like
setting up an
if we're
organization.
trying to get all of that in a 15-hour training, I mean, just from a pure time management standpoint, I think we'll be lucky to cover all of those 7 points in 15 hours. So I think your point's well taken, that you probably could do another 15 hours in that alone. So
And I think there might be another way to address that kind of thing, because when we get to supervisor responsibilities, maybe we can add something in there about supervisor has knowledge of, because that's what a lot of those responsibilities are about. Not only what they do, but what they know.
So I'm just going to say this last thing. I have to leave. I'm sorry, but I think we really, I guess from my point of view, I'm thinking, what is it that we're trying to do in this supervision? We're trying to train clinicians to provide good clinical care. And protect consumers and that. That to me is the primary responsibility. Other stuff is great, and we want to teach people all of that, but I don't think that that's in here. So what we want supervisors to be competent and become administrators someday, I think we have to separate the two from the administrators. So I'll be strong about that. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, don't apologize.
I can let it go.
I've been on both sides. I'm a clinician and an administrator, so.
And I think your comment aligns fairly well with the results of the survey too. You know, the trainees and registrants want more direction, guidance, and on how to do therapy, and that's really what we're concerned with as a state regulatory board. So.
Dean?
Thinking of what Olivia has just shared with us about the changes in the whole mental health field and the 2012 requirements, those who start their degrees in 2012 have this extra knowledge that they will gain with their degrees in order to be part of what Olivia has described. And so as I'm listening to this, I'm wondering if the supervisors have exposure to that kind of information. Maybe number 5 gets close, but maybe we could consider what we require in the 2012 requirements could also be shared with the supervisors. You know, anybody that started their degree before 2012 will not have had that training, which hopefully addresses what Olivia has described for us.
So how are you thinking of that, Kim, as you're making your note?
Incorporate sometimes they're good on the fly, sometimes not so much. That's an interesting point when I think about that we're requiring students to have all that knowledge, but then you have these supervisors who do not even have, we're presuming they haven't had that exposure.
Some of them haven't yet.
But
seasoned ones.
Yeah, I would.
So recovery orientation to wellness.
Yeah, but part of me, when we talk about what the supervisor has to have knowledge of, I mean, when we talk about current theories, current techniques, current practices, it seems to me that somewhere along the way, by and large, most supervisors would have stumbled onto that. But I think it, assuming that is probably not the best course of action. So I think before we commit, I would want to go back and look at those 2012 requirements and see what might be applicable for a supervisor to have before we jump into that and go down that road.
So
I'm kind of hearing some of what Sarita is saying too. I mean, I think we want to reform and revise the supervision requirements. Yeah, I don't think we want to get so prescriptive that everybody says, well, I'm not doing that.
Right.
Yeah. The idea is to make it better, not
more cumbersome.
Yeah.
Olivia?
Just a couple of things. Number 1 is competencies necessary for new supervisors, and I think it might encompass what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Since the SB 33 and the 2012 requirements, the system has moved on.
Mm-hmm.
So the agencies are now dealing with, the agencies are now functioning, they have different needs for supervision and for their clinicians than they did at that time.
Mm-hmm.
When we did the SB 33, we surveyed, I'm looking at Steve, we surveyed we surveyed a lot of agency directors and got feedback from them about what they wanted educators to cover in their programs. And I'm wondering if that might be something worthwhile doing now with supervision, because I know that agency directors and county directors are concerned about having people who were trained to be supervisors and they don't want to lose them. And this is in the context of public mental health. But I know they're concerned about having people who've been around for a while and whose knowledge and skills are not updated in the same way as treatment and systems are moving.
Making a note to survey directors. Okay, Shirley.
I just, on the area of course content, I just want to ask, I remember a few years ago, the board attempted to create structure to course content, and maybe I'm fantasizing because I'm feeling old, but I remember being at a board meeting where there was a conversation coming to the audience from the board about the course content, and the dialogue was the audience was not accepting of the board moving into structuring course content, and I was actually kind of surprised because when I looked at what the board gave, we were pretty much doing that, so I'm like, okay, but everybody in the audience was like, oh, no, don't cross over. So this is that conversation, right? So maybe the history we can look at the history of that conversation and see what that is. And I also just want to remind us all that clinical supervisors are licensed professionals. And when you're supervising, you're signing your paperwork under penalty of perjury. So I don't know anybody in their right mind who's going to risk their license to circumvent the expectation. That's one. Two, I also, what Leah said earlier about gatekeeping responsibility, through the years I have recognized that there, and I will make a distinction, that there are people on both sides of the table who understand that this process is learning a skill to provide to your client, and then there are people who are about, on the license side, my job is to help you get licensed, and on the supervisory side, my job is to get the hours to get to the test. So, in some of the responses to the survey, I mean, you see it out there. And, ethically, if you're supervising, you're going to work that through. But when I saw some of the responses to the criticisms of supervision, well, the basic fact is if you're a clinical supervisee and you're in supervision and your needs not being met and you are not speaking up, you don't even have the basics of interpersonal skill and advocacy for yourself. How are you doing it for your client? So there's so much about this that cannot be controlled, but it already is controlled. You have licensed people. You have them signing your paperwork under penalty of perjury. You have the piece about 2 out of 5 years before you provide. You have 36 years of CEUs. I mean, I don't think anybody who's in it is flying blindly with what you already have. I just
So for right now, it sounds like sticking with these 7 is a good start. I would like to just wordsmith number 5, because gender is I don't know if you want to do contextual/cultural variables, such as like gender, race, social class, etc. I would put those, or maybe even religion as a 4th, because you can't hit them all, but contextual/cultural variables and such as, or race, gender, social class, religion, etc.
Got it. There's something in that, I think it's the SB 33 language that kind of has a broad coverage of those kind of things. We can look and see how we word it there.
And culture is so much broader than those things, so the et cetera is really critical. But so it sounds like we have some direction about getting more information maybe from directors, but at least these 7 look really good as the initial training. So then it looks like the next piece is what would this 6-hour training be like that you were going to cover next, but we've kind of covered that, haven't we?
We have, and honestly, in all everything that I've looked at, nobody really requires specific content for that. Other states, other entities. So
So we'll look
These
at
were the only
Colorado
two.
and
Yeah.
and see what they do in terms of languaging a process as opposed to the content.
Yeah, exactly.
Kathy?
Can I just make a quick comment, going back one topic? When the committee or the board is looking at the course content or of the supervision, some of the comments I heard, the only concern I have is that if you're looking at the curriculum, the academic curriculum, remember that that is different than the supervision. I mean, what they're learning at the school is, of course, it's where they're beginning to learn their education and experience towards becoming a therapist or a social worker. But part of it is a trickling of here's everything you might be touching, and you should get a general knowledge. Versus supervision is not. It's not that role. They're two separate roles. So I don't necessarily know that what's covered in the education needs to be covered in supervision. As a therapist or social worker moves on in their career, they are selecting what they want to do, and some things no longer become pertinent. I don't know, does public health, if someone is never going to go into public health, has no interest in public health,
Sure.
Does the training of the supervisor need to be in public health? Maybe yes, maybe no. I think that's for the committee to vet more, but I guess I would just encourage you not to assimilate the academic and the supervision. They're two separate things, and I think
Sure.
I just encourage you to look at them separately.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that surveying the directors will give us information and we can choose how to manage that. Yeah, Olivia?
It is the context. It's the supervision setting, because I agree with Kathy. There are people, private practitioners will be affected by the changes, but they may not need to have the same kind of updating of skills and knowledge as people who are supervising in the public system.
Okay.
So it is kind of tricky, and we don't want to impose needless kinds of requirements on people.
So it just dawned on me while the two of you were talking, do we want to include supervision of supervision as part of the initial requirement?
This is Janley Wong, NSW. I'm trying to do both, but I really feel like some of the content should be self-determined by the supervisor and not necessarily in any prescribed course. So usually the way the 15-hour course has been working for us is that it's just the fundamentals that were outlined in the statute. So if we do move more towards competency activities, a course is included in that. It doesn't mean you can't take a course, and many people do in workshops and conferences. So if we're talking about different forms of content, if that's in that area, there's no problem if it's self-selected rather than prescribed. And social work is pretty broad. I think MFTs are starting to encounter that because they've really gone into public settings and they're beginning to realize how broad it is. I mean, just like Kathy said, not everybody's in health, not everybody's in mental health, not everybody's in child welfare. It's just a very broad area. So we want to give people discretion. You know, let them pick what they think is needed. The other thing is, I think it's actually really important they understand the client population and the programs. But that doesn't have to be in the 15-hour course. That can be under competencies. I took a job in child welfare. I better know child welfare, not so much because it makes me a better clinician, but because it makes me a better supervisor. Because if I know the rules and regulations in child welfare, I'll be able to do a better job supervising workers in child welfare. So, but that should be self-determined, self-selected, not prescribed.
Makes sense. So I had asked about supervision of supervision.
Yeah, and I think that's really the same thing because if you're in an agency setting, that means that the agency has to agree, you know, somehow to provide that. And that's back to what Sarita was uncomfortable with because she's an administrator, is that which agency has a staff to supervise supervisors? You know, Now, there is a form of supervision, and it could be in two realms, as Sarita would acknowledge. There's administrative supervision of supervisors, and there's clinical supervision of supervisors. And that probably exists in many agencies now. But just to supervise supervisors on their supervision, I'm not sure agencies are ready for that, or they're doing that.
Or have the capacity.
Yeah, they're used to the tradition. Yeah, some are, but
some aren't.
But many aren't.
Yeah, thank you.
I was just looking over the content areas, and while on the one hand I don't...
Can you speak into the microphone, please?
I'm not in favor of expanding anymore. There's one area that I just wanted to mention to you, which is the issue of use of modern technology. And not being specific, but I don't see anything in there. I mean, you could say it's a competency, but to bring it to the forefront for supervisors' attention, things like supervisees using emails, cell phones, other kinds of communications, texting, what is done, what's not done. And there are no answers right now. I mean, this is a very new and perhaps even controversial area. But to attune supervisors to issues of modern technology, not to specify anything because over time they'll change. But for right now, that's another area that concerns me.
So under number 5, under contextual, I might include technology under that as well, the contextual cultural variables, and put that as a list of one of the such as, so that people have that in the forefront. Okay, thank you. All right.
Would that be, I'm trying to think, technology, I almost wonder, it is contextual. I almost wonder if we should have, it seems like it would be awkward. I'm just trying to figure out how to wordsmith this a little bit. Would it be, could we say in the context of the modality that the therapy is being provided?
Well, maybe you do two separate pieces. One is contextual, such as the therapeutic modality and the setting, and cultural issues, such as list.
I like that. Therapeutic modality and setting.
Right? Because private practice is going to be different than...
And then cultural, then the other part could be cultural variables, including...
Cultural variables, including, such as...
And with the et cetera, I mean, that brings in the generational issue. And I think when you're talking about a lot of the things that Steve was talking about,
It's definitely
they're really generational in many ways.
Digital natives.
Okay.
Should we move? So it's 12:20, and what we have left on this page is course providers and instructors and supervisors certificate in lieu of, I don't know if we're going to have, what time do you guys have flights? Oh, fine.
We have plenty of time.
Okay. All right. How about for our constituents? Could we make it to 1? Can people make it to 1 o'clock?
If possible, I would like to try to get through as much of this as we can so that we can move on to the next topic.
I just want to make sure people will be here to do it.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Let's keep going then. Thank you.
Okay. So the next thing, we probably touched on this is in our discussion there, but in-person training, as we know, is something that has been brought up as that would be the ideal. An in-person interactive training for supervisors, but that's not a thing that it's not feasible for everybody. So if we wanted to require the course to somehow be interactive, it was just one of those things that came, looking at the survey and what supervisors found helpful for them was having some hands-on practical training. So I'm not sure that we need to specify that the training should somehow have an interactive component, but that's something I wanted to bring up for discussion.
Yeah, I think one difficulty is defining what interactive means.
It is, yeah.
And then we get back to that really challenging argument of remote people with busy schedules, seeing lots of clients. So interactive means that you have to take time away from clients, right, to attend, whether online or in person, or something. Yeah, that's difficult.
If we're looking at going to more of a process action, actively engaged model for that 6-hour training every other year,
So
that's
maybe
kind
we
of
don't have
going in a different direction than this.
But what if about the initial
training?
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking of things like there's a live instructor that you can interact with. You're taking it online. I've done trainings like that, or classes, or some sort of a evaluation test, which I think a lot of the CE courses do that. They do a test at the end anyway, or some sort of skill building. So it doesn't have to be. But I don't want to get too restrictive either. So these are just examples. But then, like you said, how do you define that?
Well, there are courses, online courses that are
that do
interactive and that require logins, log-offs, track hours, and those are equally accessible from a remote area
But
as.
do we want to make it obligatory? That it's interactive in some way.
I'm kind of leaning toward no, actually, because I think the agencies that it's going to be too restrictive.
We might get.
We don't want to. We're already going to lose people doing 15 hours.
We might get a lot of pushback on that. I think we would from constituents. Jen?
Yeah, Jen Lee Wong, NASW. I think we have to be careful about word choice and usage. Interactive means many, many things. So what I got from the wonderful survey was that it's really about practicing supervision. That's the interactivity that I got from the survey. Role-playing and observing and feedback on how you're supervising. That's what I read into it. So I think the idea of the competency activities, that would be a good area for that. People could selectively pick and choose those versus if you try to cram it into a 15-hour course, you're just not going to have time because each person in the class has to have some kind of role play experience. That would take hours.
No, I think
and
she was
hours.
just saying even just that you have an instructor you could talk to, as opposed to just one, how like, is it PESCI? You can do an online where there's no people involved, like you just read text and take a test. So she's saying, do we want to require something beyond just being able to read text and that 15 hours of reading text?
I think we'd get a lot of pushback. I think we're already going to a 15-hour. We're driving some content, requiring some content. Boy, I think if we added that variable, even though it may be a great idea in terms of quality of the process, I think we would really not only lose a lot of people, I think we'd alienate a lot of our stakeholders.
So I guess the question is there any argument for adding that requirement? All right, so we'll let that one go. Thank you, though. That was a very good question.
Okay, so the next discussion is on course providers and instructors. So our thought, since we already have a regime for continuing education in general, that we would keep that same set of requirements. But I had, that would help ensure the quality of the course because you have the approval agency oversight. But a question came up when I was hearing Charlene talking about that the agencies provide training. I actually have a question for Roseanne about, would her agency need to become a CE provider in order to, under the new, I wasn't sure.
To be clear, our agency works with the UCCF, formerly the IUC. So we work with all the 5 Southern California MSW accredited programs. They do our trainings.
They do your
Yeah.
because I wasn't sure if that would be
school.
because I think now under the new CE.
A government entity would have to have a number, but if it's an accredited institution or approved, they don't have to.
But the thing is now we're looking at going beyond a CE.
Right. So I wasn't sure if that still fits correctly here because I am aware there are community agencies that do their own supervisor training, and so would they be now excluded from doing that? Is that a concern?
They wouldn't be excluded. They'd
have to.
It's not going to count for CE unless they're a CE provider with one of the
Toward their
approval.
36.
Yeah,
Right,
towards
but
the
would it count
36.
for supervisor training? And if so, we need to craft the language that way.
It
So
depends on how we write the language.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we have to figure out how we're going to write that language. So make a note that that's something that would need to be addressed.
But what do we want to do with that? Do we want to say,
Well, first we got to figure out what supervision ongoing training is going to look like before I think we can answer.
well, I'm talking about the initial as well.
The initial 15
The initial,
hours.
yeah.
Oh,
Seems to me we're going to have to figure out a way to allow that to count because 15 hours is a lot of time. Yeah, it counts now, but
But the new CE,
The
well,
new
and you have
CE
someone
requirement.
sponsoring your coursework.
Yeah, you're
But not everyone does.
Yeah.
No.
how hard would it be to, for agencies, perhaps even smaller agencies? I mean, you're a huge, huge
so
and
it's
monstrous
hard.
entity.
It's really
It's-
no different than if they were to apply to us.
It's hard.
They could
It's
apply,
still hard.
It's hard because you have to be organized about it.
You have to fill out paperwork and you have to pay
paperwork.
money.
Yeah,
But
and, yeah, the expense, I think, has gone up.
The expense. So,
Yeah.
how realistic or how troubling would it be if we were to allow a mechanism in there that if agencies were providing the 15 hours and could demonstrate that they are providing the training in the content areas? You see where I'm going with
Then
this?
we're back in the business of evaluating CEs.
But in,
I think what you end up doing is setting up two different standards. Licensees, you have to do it HERO, but government agencies not so much.
But there's an exception.
There's an exception, and then it's problematic. Administratively, it's going to be an issue.
This is going to be a bigger conversation.
Yeah.
Because if this and I don't know how pervasive the problem is.
I don't either, and it's not to say that I think that the agencies are doing a bad job, because they're probably not, because they're training specific to their needs. I think we need to think about how we write that so that it works.
When you do your survey for directors, can you ask them this? Like, are they providing their supervisor training?
How many
And
hours?
and how many hours? And if so, were they previously approved by the BBS, and were they planning on getting approval from one of the other entities?
well, I think under the previous CE set of requirements, you could be a government agency offering a CE course, and you do not have to be an approved provider. So that exemption is, but not under the new. So we would need, so we would need to find out if they plan to, like you said, do they plan to apply for this? Are they still, do they offer the courses? And if they didn't plan to, would they be willing to? Or is that, do they have that,
Well, and here's it's something I just ran into last week. I did have a conversation with LA County because they were inquiring about the new CE requirements, but they were also a sponsor under APA. So their question was, gee, when my provider number with BBS expires, can I just continue to offer under the APA as a sponsor? Yes, they can. So I think we might find, because agencies employ a variety of different mental health professionals, in order for the training to count maybe for a psychologist, maybe they have to be registered or approved under the APA, and if that's the case, then we're fine. So that might be
So let's see how
a
big of a
question to
problem it
ask.
is.
Yeah, because I talked to two people in the same week, two entities in the same week, same situation, BBS provider, but also sponsored under the APA, and they were happy campers. So, and you have a camp that just opened up as an approval agency, and you've got CPA, California Psychological.
How
Association.
expensive is it for camp for them to become a provider? If it was an agency coming in, is it roughly like under $100 or $200? Yeah,
More.
yeah.
BBS is 200.
200 to 500. Yeah,
2 to 5 is the range.
That's what I've seen is the 200 to 500 range, which is a lot for a community agency who can barely hire a supervisor, or an individual provider.
And do they have to renew their,
Yeah.
Yeah, I just looked at the camp requirements, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but there was like an initial $300 to apply, and then an annual or biannual $200 to $300. As an individual, I was a BBS provider. I will drop that because of the expense of going on. So that may be an issue for some of the agencies. On the other side, I worked with one county, and they didn't have BBS or APA approval, so what they did is they went out and got one of the other agencies to connect with them. And I know I could name probably 3 or 4 that have used, for instance, Alliant University in San Francisco. They will come in and be the provider and take care of all of the material. So maybe that's for the larger agencies, I don't know, but there are those people out there who will be providers, who will be able to be contracted by agencies that don't get the that aren't providers themselves.
Right.
And you're right, with the APA, once you have APA approval, you're good to go.
Yeah. So.
Steve, how will you get that survey out to directors?
Well, there's the Mental Health Directors Association, so we could start there.
Start there.
And
Why don't you go to
can-
the institutions as well to send it to their agencies that have relationships with agencies for their trainings? So that
There's also the California Council of Community Mental Health Agencies.
great.
That's right.
And I can help you with that if you like.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So let's see where we're at with that, and then we can move forward with.
Who was the third CMHDA? Who was the? There was 2 organizations and then one other.
And then the universities.
Universities. Okay.
Supervisors certifications.
Yeah, well, there's just one more issue, or one more thing to ask about. Our current CE regs allow a licensee who teaches a course to count the actual hours of the course toward their CE. So did we want to allow someone who teaches supervisor training, who actually trains them to be able to count that as their, so I think that's.
As an instructor, I would say, yeah.
I knew what your response would be.
Well, I mean, I teach the law and ethics course, so every year I have to change it. Every year I have to make sure I stay on top of it. So, I mean, of course, people might not do that, but you can't always regulate that anyway. So I think, yeah, instructors should get credit because they have to know the material better.
Right.
And you have to, you do, and you can't be giving incorrect information.
Right.
I know, and having to explain why I can't give them credit if we don't. I just
Right.
find
Yeah.
that would-
That would be difficult.
That would be a conversation I would really not to have.
Right.
So on to the next. At a prior meeting, the committee tentatively agreed that if you hold a certain type of a supervisor certification, that it should be accepted in lieu of meeting the following 2 requirements. It would be the 2 years of licensure and the initial supervisor training.
So they would have already gotten the training if they're certified for sure.
Right.
So it really is more of a
It's more-
conversation of the licensure piece.
Right. You're absolutely right. So there are a couple of other things that didn't come up. Whether a certification holder would also be exempt from the requirement that supervisors have to have practiced psychotherapy or supervision of those who perform psychotherapy for 2 out of the last 5 years before they can supervise. I think if you're going to exempt the 2 years of licensure, that's a tough one to kind of deal with. So I wasn't sure how we might want to approach that.
So which certifications don't require that they have been practicing for 2 years post-license?
I'm not sure I recall seeing that in the requirements. I do have that list.
We had that, I think, somewhere.
I have it from the prior meeting.
So camped, do they need to have been licensed for 2 years?
I have to look. I can't imagine. I was just thinking
I
that
think
would
it-
maybe be in there.
I think it was.
I would think it was maybe.
Right. How
Oh,
about
yes,
for
camped,
amped?
it is licensed 2 years. You're right.
I'm not sure, because I was asking one of our lead instructors here.
Well,
Okay. So it incorporates the 2 years.
well,
Right. Okay. And social
But
work.
They have
Whoops,
to
sorry.
go through supervision of supervision. So California supervisors would have to have the 2 years in order to do that. But it's a national certification, and I'm not sure if nationally they have that.
I think nationally they don't. I think it was AMPT was the one that didn't have that requirement.
What I've seen, some of the so the social work agent or agency that does supervisor certifications, they require licensure for 5 years, but and CAMP requires 2 years. But the other two, which is the AAMFT, it says 2 years of postgraduate experience. So it doesn't necessarily, you have to be licensed, but then 2 years of postgraduate experience. And then the NBCC, which is actually CCE now, for this piece of it, you have to have a license and 3 years postmaster's
So it's just
experience
the
as
AMPT
well.
people who would not.
No, the CCE people too. 3 years postmaster's experience and licensure. There's no specific time of licensure. So
those are the two.
yeah, so it sounds like they would probably be pretty darn close if they had those.
Right.
But I'm almost wondering if it's kind of a moot point, is that would get you to pretty close to 2 years, that many hours of experience, and you.
Well, but some people are on the 6-year internship
Well,
program.
that's true too.
Well, I mean, the thing is, when on the one hand, as supervisors, they'll be far superiorly trained than the average supervisor who has the 2 years. On the other hand, their clinical experience might be fairly narrow. However, even someone 2 years post-license could have a very narrow, like even though they have 2 years, they might be seeing one client a week. So would that really make a difference? I'm kind of leaning toward letting go of the 2-year requirement for the certification because those certifications are so rigorous.
Would we be adding that? So what exists right now?
They have to have the 2 years.
They have to have the 2 years right now. There's
Right.
no
Post-license.
there is no exception for if you have a certificate. So
Right.
we would be okay. So
Gifting
gifting that.
for the AMPT and for the NBCC.
Okay.
I think you're all actually providing an incentive to get the additional or the more rigorous training as a supervisor. So I think in balance, I think that outweighs the 2 years.
And they've had supervision on their supervision in each of those agencies.
Yeah. So
which
I
is
could
really
see
helpful.
that being an incentive.
And if our purpose is to improve the quality of supervision, then it seems like it's another way to achieve that.
Would anyone disagree with that? So if they're certified, they can waive the 2-year requirement? The AMPT people, they have to be licensed though, right?
That's not, well, I would have to, they have to be, yes, have to be licensed, but not for a particular.
Not to take the course.
No,
but
to be
get the
certified.
designation.
So they could be certified and still be an intern?
No.
Okay. Right. Well, but if we waive that requirement, they could be supervising without a license. So I think maybe we require that they be licensed, but waive the 2-year post-license.
There's the 30-hour course, and then there's the approved supervisor designation. And to qualify for that, they need to be licensed and a clinical fellow member of AMFT.
Okay, so we just make sure that it's not that they've taken the course.
Well, absolutely,
but that
yeah.
they've
It's
been
the
certified.
Approved.
So if they've been certified, that covers being licensed. Jim?
Jan Lee Wong, NASW. Rather than try to build the regulations or statute around each individual program, you might want to just use some simple language, that here are the basics.
Well, that's what we're exploring.
Right. Here are the basics. If your certification course meets these basics, you're fine. And then it'll leave it up to the different organizations to make sure their certification is in line with the basic requirements.
As opposed to, these are the 5 organizations that we've approved as certification being qualified to.
Right. That way, if you do it that way, you have to look at each of the organizations, see if they are up to snuff or not, and then you have to negotiate with them to make sure they're up to snuff. You know, it's like extra work.
Okay, so the work would maybe be up front to look at what are the minimum practices of these particular agencies for certification, and if the certification meets what the minimums are for among all of them, then...
No, you just say, here are the minimums, state standard. And
But what we're trying to do is do certification in lieu of.
Right. Well, you still can have minimum standards. You just say your certification program has to meet these minimum standards and let them figure it out instead of you being the police.
Right, but I'm saying the way we would develop the minimum standards is to look at what the certifying bodies are doing.
What you have some minimum standards here already.
So then would that kind of make it a
I'm
moot point to
confused.
do the in lieu? How, you know, we're setting minimum standards, but then we're saying, if you have this, you can waive this one standard. You know what I mean?
This
so it's-
requirement.
Yeah.
Because certification is just removing the 2-year post license
That's really all it
requirement.
would
That's
do.
all it's
Right.
doing.
Right. But we were talking about how many years did you practice psychotherapy, and we were talking about a couple other things.
Oh, so the 2 that you have to practice for 2 out of the last 5 years of psychotherapy?
Because there's apparently some variation there.
Because my thought is that the certification is so rigorous that as long as they're licensed, that they need to be licensed to be a supervisor, that the certification would be in lieu of those two of the last 5 years and the 2 years piece. But okay, well, the problem with the 2 of the 5 years, let's say they got certified 20 years ago and haven't seen a client for 20 years.
That's a good point.
So maybe that they've supervised or seen client practice psychotherapy in the last 2 of the last 5 years. Because I don't think I'd want somebody just because they were certified in 1985.
I think that already is, that already is part of that.
So that doesn't get waived.
No. Oh, well,
Right? Because that's a requirement.
we can, well, it depends. We haven't figured that out yet. So if that's
So
how we
maybe
wanna structure
all we waive is that we waive the 2 years post licensure. That's all we waive.
And the
Yeah.
initial
And
supervisor
the initial
training.
well, that is the
Because
supervisor
they already
training.
went through
They already
this
went through the
rigorous,
training,
yeah.
so that met
That
it.
works for me.
So all you're doing is waiving certification in lieu of the 2 years post licensure.
Correct. And then the other thing is that, right, because the one thing I was thinking of is the supervisor training has to be taken within 60 days of commencing supervision. But this could have been obtained longer ago, so that's also a benefit. Your supervisor training doesn't have to be like that, you know.
Within 60 days, right now, it's within 60 days, take the 6 hours the course.
What does the
Which I would rather have than complete and certified through one of those agencies.
Exactly. So that's another benefit.
Yeah, so we can add that benefit too. It waives that requirement.
Right.
But I would disagree with waiving the every 2 years, 6 hours. Is that what we're talking about?
No.
Just the initial
Okay.
training.
The initial, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If they've done
Because
that
this was another suggestion.
Because if they did that certification 2 years ago, then they won't, but they're still going to need to do their ongoing
Because
development.
this was, one of the proposals was to waive that, and I was not in support of that.
Okay. Okay, but I think that the next thing is, does the committee want to weigh the requirement that they've had to practice 2 out of the last 5 years?
No.
That's what okay.
Yeah, we're going to keep that.
We're keeping that, okay.
So the next question is, if you hold a certification, do we want them to do the 6-hour ongoing course requirement? But maybe that's a conversation for when we figure out what we're doing with that.
Whatever we're doing with the 6 hour, yes, they're still going to need to have something within the last 2 years for that. Because again, if they were became a supervisor 10 years ago, they're going to need some freshening up.
Okay, so we're going to keep those things intact.
So the next conversation, and hopefully we have enough time to start delving into this at least, Well, it's 12:48.
I got clients.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Well, let's introduce it and
Sure.
see where we go.
Sure. So this kind of came up because when we did the research on other states, there are some of them that require actual pre-approval of a supervisor's qualifications. So we decided to wait for the survey results before we went into it further. So with the survey indicating that about 1 of every 5 supervisees are either dissatisfied or somewhat dissatisfied of those who responded with the quality of the supervision received and with the supervisor's responsiveness to the supervisee's needs. I think it's a concerning number, and it has some real serious implications. I started thinking about things that, you have people who are paying for supervision, but yet, and the supervisee doesn't have a lot of power in the situation. So they're really sort of in some ways, they're in a vulnerable position. So I was thinking, if we could somehow better monitor the supervision process, it could offer them some protections. And so our survey results showed that 54% of supervisors would require supervisors or would support requiring supervisors to be registered with the board. But if you read through a lot of the comments, they had mixed feelings. They were like, well, I don't know, maybe yes, but I don't know what that would look like. So I thought about there could be two different ways of doing this. One that's more, labor intensive, hands-on, and
But
one
thorough.
But thorough, yes, but very thorough. Probably provides the best protection. But is it the real world? Is it necessary? And is it
we
working in the real world?
100% to correct the 1% of problems?
Right, exactly. So if we did a pre-approval and registration, it would require pre-approval. So you've got people waiting for processing. There's no guarantee we could get positions, as we all know how that works now. We would have to make modifications to different processes. So there are definitely some advantages and disadvantages. I won't get too deep into it since we're on time. So the alternative structure would be something like this. This is just sort of a jumping off point. We could have the supervisor self-certify to the board under penalty of perjury that they meet all of the qualifications, and they would do that initially, as opposed to at the end. It's part of the big problem here. It's all done at the end. Your supervision's done. Oh, boom! Here's all of your information about your supervisor and that they meet the qualifications. Well, all that's already happened. So that would at least give us some upfront information, and it would allow us to know who is supervising. Right now, we don't know until we get the hours of experience at the end. So it would allow us to have that information. We could also require the supervisor responsibility statement to be submitted to the board at that time. Another thought is to require the board to be notified of termination of supervision with an individual.
Do not want to do that.
Okay. That's a definite no.
It'll be a nightmare for you.
As in thinking about supervisees and the position that they're put into, we thought about if the supervisor were to provide the supervisee with some sort of a disclosure that tells them if you have a complaint about a supervisor, here's how you can address that. You can go through your agency, you can go to the board. That would have to be something we think through about, but some sort of like an informed consent. That's what I'm picturing. And then we would, of course, do a random audit of the supervisor qualifications. So
Those would be advantages.
those would be, yes. So I think it would provide a structure that increases accountability without some really significant changes, or it would still require more work on the side of the board. I can't say it wouldn't require another position, but it would be more manageable. It would be a starting point.
So one thing that stands out for me as maybe more doable, and it would be a breeze issue, would be that they would self-certify online, and they could do that when they renew or as soon as they meet the requirements to become or choose to become a supervisor. And so at least there's a list of names and people can look that up. Like if they're looking for a supervisor in their area, maybe there's a way that they can do a sort to look that up. And then as we get to requirements for supervision, I think that supervisors need to provide an informed consent to supervisees about the process of supervision and how they'll be evaluated, which is maybe another conversation, but at least there, you would have record of who the supervisors are. Supervisees could look up supervisors more easily, because right now all they can look up is whether their license is expired. And that way it won't include an extra person. And then, except for the random audit idea.
I know the filing, but
Can make
The filing? What do you mean?
Well, I think what we were talking about, and I think you mentioned it, was when the supervisors, they do the supervision agreement. I mean, currently we wait till the
end.
Currently we wait till the end. Within that, though, is kind of like the consent, saying, hey, I have all this stuff as a supervisor. I can supervise you. This is our agreement. We can add additional information in there about, this is what you do if you're not happy with me. Sending that in beforehand, so we would have to get that form. We're going to have to input it into the database and then, paper file it into the.
Why couldn't they do it electronically and just upload it into?
I mean, we could do that too. That's part of it, but
I'm thinking you don't need that form. I think we just require that supervisor give it, but it's like many things that we don't follow up on, right? Because it's doing 100% for the 1% who's going to mess up.
I mean, we could do that. It's not. I mean, it's just going to add it. It's just going to give us numbers. Is all that's going to do for us.
But I think that supervisors having to sign under penalty of perjury. I mean, we had a case recently where someone, signed in and perjured themselves. That happens all the time. But at least that's better recourse, stronger recourse, that they've done that you've got it online if a problem should emerge. Not a lot of the problems are with supervisors that come across and usually it's the same complaints as what we talked about with the psychologists, and it may be merited that they're not getting their papers signed off, right? Because there's a problem. And occasionally it's not, but those are really, really small percentages. So I would just like to have the data of who the supervisors are so the supervisees can look for people, confirm that they have signed under penalty of perjury, and not collect any paperwork. But we can require that they add that to their agreement, that statement.
I think the thought with the supervisory statement, the responsibility statement coming in at the beginning, was that's how we were going to start to build the database of the supervisors. Right now we don't know, and it's not an additional form. We're just asking them to send it in at a different time.
So but why not just have them click something online? It's faster for them. It's faster for you.
Or, the other thing, similar, just a simple form, not for every intern that they have, but as I'm beginning to supervise, here's my form, it'd probably be similar. I've, fulfilled all these requirements to be a supervisor. We check the box when we get the form, or if we can do it online, which...
Do it online.
It's adding a box for right now, it's a lot of money and a lot of time to be able to do that. So there's ways we can actually collect
Wouldn't
something.
a staff person be more expensive for a year or multiple years?
It's to get it into the system first of all. To be honest with you, it's probably the same amount as a staff person to get it into this. So we'll have to not only get a staff person, but then also. But there's notes we can utilize. I think certain.
And I'd like to, we kind of brainstormed about this idea, absent any input from staff that actually going to be doing this or could be doing this. So, and as we're so often reminded, we should probably include them in the process.
Sure, of course,
But I would like to, at least, and that's where we came up with the alternative structure, because we knew option one was going to be, that's ideal, but it's a roll of the dice whether you get the people or not. This other way was kind of a way we could, it was twofold. If they had sent in that form, if we could build the database, and then from that database, that's how we could do our audits. Because right now we just have no mechanism right now. So.
I like the idea of just a single form, not for every intern.
Right,
Mhm.
right,
That-
I
right.
can't-
think
for
that
the
makes good
supervisor.
sense. That's less violent.
Yeah.
but-
It's less violent, yeah.
And that would be, and we could do, that would be a big, less of a change in the system. And in fact, we
Oh,
have
right.
things we can, there might even be a modifier in there right now that we can use, so, anyway.
And would we require the psychologists and psychiatrists to submit those?
Well,
Well, how, I don't know how we, oh, yeah,
would-
I guess there's a way we could do that.
They
They have to
wouldn't.
sign the responsibility statement.
They do, but then
I don't know how we would.
I don't think we can list. I don't know how we would do that. And in terms of an online database, I don't know that we can pull them
There's
into. Well,
possibility
a
because we
record.
share entities and stuff. I mean, there's maybe a way. I would have to see.
I'm not leaning either way. I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
we're just
But yeah,
exploring.
I'd
Yeah.
like to see.
Maybe we explore that just a little bit more after we've chatted with staff. Since they're all screaming at us right now.
I'm not going to do
No,
it.
it's going to be easy.
Great idea. Someone else can do it.
Yeah.
You know that it's taking a staff person.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I want to come back and do this kind of, but that was just sort of our quick little brainstorm on something. If we were to register, what would be a less intrusive way of starting that?
The other thing that I've talked about internally is, and it's not just about this. If we know who's out there supervising, we can communicate with them better. We can
Send them-
have a list of the email addresses and send them newsletters. Things like that.
To
where-
update them on changes.
Absolutely.
Right.
No, I think that you bring it back.
I just wanted to say thank you for, I know this is an ongoing open conversation, but I do think there needs to be more, I don't like the word oversight, but that's the one I came up with. So I do think it's necessary for the protection of the supervisee, the consumer, and even the supervisor. So thank you for looking at this. And I also think the idea Christy brought up is kind of an interesting one, some kind of information that goes with all these forms pre-licensees have about what their recourse is, if they have concerns, because we speak to a lot of pre-licensings who are, and you don't know if their concerns have merit or not. They may not, but they're very scared to go to the BBS because they're afraid. I just spoke to someone today who was concerned. They had concerns about their supervisor, and they're afraid to go to the BBS because they thought they'd lose all their hours. So there's a lot of misinformation and lack of education out there. And while the associations do their best to educate, not everyone belongs to an association, or they may not know they can call in and ask. So I think that's an interesting idea, and I hope you look into that further. Thank you.
I would like to echo that. I'd be for whatever protects the supervisee the very best. If it's having the responsibility statement on file, it seems to make sense. I've never understood why that went at the end of the supervision, because by then it's too late. And I think we need to protect the supervisees. Earning those 3,000 hours over a minimum of 2 years, that's a lot of time and effort and maybe money. And I've never quite understood why we call them approved supervisors if nobody's doing any approving. So, I don't know, maybe there's a better term. I also think it would be nice if there were some place that interns could go as they're setting up their internship to ask questions. We have the law on the definition on what the site needs to be, but there's so many variables of picking a site and a supervisor, and then we get into the off-site business, and there are a lot of questions that go beyond just in the law. I spend a lot of my time trying to answer those questions. But anything we could do to help the interns up front so they don't waste their time with whether it's a poor supervisor or illegal site or whatever. That's what I would plea for.
Thank you. All right. Anything else on this topic? All right. Suggestions for future agenda items? Yeah. Yes.
I don't know if we have a history with this, but one of the members contacted me about bringing up a question of equality, that social workers are able to supervise MFTs for all of their hours. MFTs are not able to supervise social workers for all of their hours. So can we look at that in the future?
Yeah, we talked about that briefly at another meeting, where we would want a minimum number of hours for MFTs to be supervised under an MFT.
Yeah.
We did talk about that. We decided not to.
We decided
touch
not
it. Yeah.
to touch it yet. And I can't remember
why.
Yeah.
We presented some information. I think that it showed that they were getting a bulk of their hours under an MFTs,
anyway.
and so I don't think that it was a concern. So we tabled it.
I think this member is supervising a social worker and wants to be able to continue doing that.
Yeah, I doubt social work's going to give that up.
Yeah.
It's a national standard.
Jan Lee, would you cover your ears, please? So is that a national? It's a national standard?
It's a professional standard, and this issue was visited at least 10 years ago. And if you say everybody's all the same, which I know there's a temptation to say that, then maybe that scheme would work. But we firmly believe social workers, professional social workers, believe we are our own discipline. And we have enough distinctions in our curriculum, in our competency standards, that we cannot allow all the supervised hours to be done by non-social workers. So 10 years ago, we settled on the formula. And, you know, the argument you're making, you're not really saying it, but you're saying we're all the same. And we just don't believe that. If you're not making that argument, then you're saying it's for the convenience of the supervisee. And that should not be the primary policy issue here.
Any other future agenda items?
Hi, I'm Wendy Vitalich, intern. And just to put on the possibilities of looking at the 6-year rule for the second intern license number, being in private practice under supervision, which is something I would like to talk about at the open forum. But I just wanted to put that out on the agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no other suggestions, public comment for items not on the agenda? Hi again. I'll make this as brief because I appreciate very much being a part of this meeting. I didn't even realize that I could come. So I'm very grateful that that I am here, and there's a couple of interns as well here. And I'm very grateful to hear behind the scenes stuff. Okay, I've been in private practice under an amazing supervisor for 5.5 years, and had to wait 10 months back in 2013 when I was done with my hours in June of 2013, and I kind of got in that crunch time with cutbacks, layoffs, whatever, with the board, that I had a 10-month wait to be approved. My exam process is mine. I take total responsibility for that. I had to take the SWE twice. I passed that in December. I took the CBE in February 11th and missed it by 1 point. It feels like I slipped on a banana peel at the end of the race. And so now I have to wait another 6 months to take the CDE and praying to pass, because come September, I'm up against that 6-year rule. I guess I'm appealing to the board because of the 10-month wait, and again, I totally have empathy for the situation, but I'm a casualty of that waiting time, and I feel like I'm paying a consequence that's obviously not just affecting me, but affecting about 55 of my clients.
teenagers, families, autistic. I have an autistic client for the past 4 years that have been coming to me. And this client is now a sophomore and started when she was, when the client was in 6th grade, 7th grade, along with some very intense cases that I've been able to really support. And I'm just kind of preempting in the event I do not pass in August, then I have to say goodbye or terminate clients that rely on me. What I'm asking for, and again, I know, is that 10-month waiting period kind of took away my buffer, is really what I'm appealing to. I am so ready to fly on my own. This has been a passion dream job of mine forever, to be a therapist. So again, I have a lot of journey along the way that has led me to be able to be where I am, and I'm grateful, and believe me, it wasn't that easy. And also, I applied for a rescore 8 weeks ago, and I haven't heard anything yet. So again, I'm speaking, I'm a voice for me and many, many other people right now that have to endure a lot of the exam process. It's not easy. It's very incredibly stressful and high anxiety provoking. And I know that does not define us as therapists. However, it does control our licensure. And so I'm just speaking out today. Whatever happens for me, I don't know. But I wanted to just share that for future interns coming up that are maybe going to be up against the 6-year rule.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Any other comments? All right, it is 1:10 p.m. and we are adjourning our meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate your participation, and thank you to the staff members, Christy and Roseanne and Steve, for all your hard work. Thank you so much.
And I would like to thank the interns for coming. I'm glad you guys did.
Yeah.
Spread the word.
Spread the word.
Good.